Good morning. How you guys doing? My name is Tyree Burks. I'm the founder and CEO of Players Health. Super excited to have you guys here today. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of myself and the rest of the Players Health team to the Players Health Super Bowl Summit 2018. And a huge welcome to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the 52nd Super Bowl. This event was made possible by all of our amazing sponsors: Trier Orthopedic Center, University of Minnesota Shin Neuro Lab, Sport Engine, Health Source of Blaine, NovaCare Rehabilitation, Tackle Bar, and Trusted Coaches. We couldn't have made this happen without you. Thank you. Your presence here, sure. Your presence here is just a small reflection of the devotion that we all have for youth sports in America. Today is a huge honor for me because, let's face it, my presence on this stage is highly unlikely. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, raised by a single mother that worked 2 jobs to provide for my brother and I. I had people like you. You are the people that really made it, are the reason why I'm on this stage today. I had amazing coaches, like Coach Ward, my high school football coach, that told me to believe in myself and that I was too much of a blessing to fall prey to the streets. I had amazing sports medicine professionals like Paige, my athletic trainer at Harper College, that held me out for 8 weeks until I was cleared from an injury that left me temporarily paralyzed after I got hit in a football game, even when my coaches pressured her to put me back early. I had amazing administrators like Larry Hosted, my athletic director at Winona State, that used to invite me over his house with him and his wife after to make sure I was okay after my mom passed away. And last but not least, I had an amazing mother that supported me 100%, never missed a game, and made sure that I was loved regardless of how I played that day. Told me that I can do anything I put my mind to. All of these people made it possible for me to be here in front of you today. And also, I had both good and bad experiences that played a role in me being here also. When I was about 16, I got hit with my head down. I was paralyzed on the turf for about 15 minutes, could not move. And not to my coach's fault, but he didn't know. He thought it was a stinger, and I got pushed back out to play. This injury led to lower back injuries and other injuries that affected my professional career. And this is the reason why I decided to start Players Health. I wanted to create a company that protects everything that I love about sport, the purity of everything. And we want kids to have a great experience, and that's really my main focus here. So why the Players Health Summit? Over the years, I've enjoyed the benefits of youth sports, and I have a responsibility to create the best environment for kids all over the world, and I want them to have a better experience than I did. Times have changed, where topics of health and safety have become mere afterthoughts to now things that keep us up at night. According to the Aspen Institute, there are 2.6 million fewer athletes playing youth sports from 6 to 12 over the past 5 years. According to the CDC, high school athletes account for 2 million injuries, 500,000 doctor visits, and 30,000 hospitalizations every year, with more than 3.5 million children under the age of 14 receiving medical treatment every year. And of all these injuries, 30% of them are head injuries. And then according to Darkness to Light, 1 in every child is sexually abused before their 18th birthday. The median age is 9. These stats are mind-blowing. I'm sure that you all are to some extent aware of them, but you're aware of why we need to make sports safer. But how is really the question? And that's what we're here to talk about. How do we make sports safer? How do we build an organizational culture that puts health and safety before the points of the scoreboard? Players Health was created with this mission in mind. We wanted to create the safest experience for an athlete to play the game that they love. We've gathered the best and brightest, from professional athletes to coaches, sports medicine professionals, and insurance executives to begin a dialogue and inspire action in all of us. My goal here is that we leave here not only motivated to make change within the organizations that we serve in, but also we want to really build more of an impact within our organization. Again, I welcome you, and I look forward to all the great work that we're going to do here today together. Thank you. And so I'm going to get started with our first panel. This panel was brought to you by the Positive Coaching Alliance. And our moderator is of the Positive Coaching Panel is the director of the Timberwolves Lynx Basketball Academy and former Division III player, Troy Pearson. Well, you guys can start following up as I. And Dr. Heather Bergerson, the adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at the University of Minnesota. Kevin Merkel has been the associate athletic director for the Minnesota High School League for 16 years, and also is the activities director for Northfield High School for 14 years. Laura Halderson, she is the first she's the first head coach of the Gopher women's hockey team and guided the Gopher to 3 national championships. And Simon Almer, Simon is a mental skills coach at the Premier Sports Psychology. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys all for being here. Just want to echo Tariq's sentiment in that regards, and got some great topics today. So we're going to dive right in and kind of stay sensitive to time and stay on schedule. So let's start off with Simon. Maybe tell us a little bit about your practice, first of all, and dive into a little bit about the development that you see in athletes and you know, some of the mental strength and those types of things you see in a competitive athlete.
Yeah, so I'm a mental skills coach at Premier Sports Psychology. We have a team of sports psychologists and mental skills coaches there that work with individual athletes, with teams, with coaches, with parents. We've worked with the University of Minnesota for 7 years. Are on campus there providing services as one example. We work from the highest levels of sport at professional and Olympic levels, all the way down to the grassroots with collegiate, high school, middle school athletes. In terms of mental skills and development, as there are a lot of coaches in the room, and you know, many would recognize that the mental game can often be the differentiator between an average athlete and a good athlete, or a good athlete and a great athlete. And these skills need to be learned, just like we need to learn how to throw a tight spiral, or you know, how to take a slap shot. So, you know, the difference between when an athlete hears the word focus from the sideline from a coach, they naturally know what to focus on, and they understand the difference between maybe a broad focus versus a narrow focus. And so from a performance standpoint, you know, that's where the mental game can come in, as well as these are often enduring transferable skills that they can take from their sports experience into the classroom or into the workplace or into their relationships with key people.
We find within the Positive Coaching Alliance that, as you just mentioned, a lot of the skills that we learn, whether physical or mental, help build a baseline, if you will, or a bedrock for, you know, future growth, life, character building, those types of things. How do you, in your practice, work with your athletes to focus more on the mental game? I use 2 words there, you know, or mental, but then you use focus. So, for example, how do you get an athlete to focus? That can be such a cliche when a coach says it from the sideline.
Yep.
But how do you get an athlete to focus, or to focus just on their mental development as well as their physical?
Yeah, there's a number of elements. And the first thing we start with, especially when we're working with an individual athlete as opposed to team sessions, is understanding where they're at in the beginning. Often the very first step is just helping them build their athlete self-awareness. There are a lot of athletes that come off the field. You ask them about the game and they're not sure what their thoughts or feelings or body sensations were during the game. So the first step is often building that athlete self-awareness. And then as we move to focus, it's often take a picture in baseball, walking them through, okay, as you're preparing to pitch, there's often a progression of different focal points that they go through. Maybe it starts broad, what's the game situation? You know, what's the count? You know, how many out? What innings are we in? What happened when I threw to this pitcher the last time, the hitter the last time? And then often it comes down to a narrow focus, which may be simply targeting the very center.
Kevin, your experience as an administrator, both at the high school level and now with the state high school league, you've seen so many changes. I mean, we could talk about each, you know, detailed element, but what have you seen as the biggest change from your experience and your leadership in youth sports?
It's hard to say. Sometimes we talk about kids. I think kids really don't change that much, but the environment they grow up in changes. And along with that, I think the thing that's changed is the culture of youth sport. And with that, high school is certainly part of it. On the emphasis on winning just keeps getting greater and greater, and puts a lot of pressure on administrators and coaches as well. And then just the size and the impact of youth sports and the sport specialization that's going on, that continues to grow. That was around to a certain point. I was a head coach back in the 1980s, but we didn't have those pressures of year-round things going on near as much. We tried to get kids to be involved in other sports, but now they're playing the same sport year-round. And of course, that starts to hurt participation and hurt numbers. But there didn't used to be fall baseball or fall basketball and some of those kinds of things. I'm not trying to pick on any one sport. But we really believe, from a high school standpoint, it's best if a kid has a well-rounded experience and participates in more than one sport. In fact, studies will show that you can become a better athlete by participating more in one sport. So I think that, and then along with that, because of those influence youth sports, and because of the investment that parents make, both time and money, that increases the pressure that you get from parents then as kids get into high school level, and why my kid's not playing or why they're not developing to become the best or whatever that might be.
We'll talk a little bit here with sports specialization, and there's a separate panel for that discussion because it is a huge development, if you will, or change over the last few decades. But talking about the parents, you use the word investment. So many of us are parents here, and some say, we've invested our time, money in the development of our children. Therefore, they should see X amount of playing time. They should be the captain. They should be the leading scorer. They should get the scholarship, whatever goes into a mindset of a parent. From the high school league, things that you have been putting together for high schools and coaches, but also just what are you seeing other parents or school administrators, how are they handling that more specifically from the parent perspective, right? The pressure that the parents are putting on coaches nowadays.
Well, it's an issue, and it gets caught up in I just heard a story yesterday where coach is under pressure because the kids and parents are concerned the way he substitutes in basketball. He puts certain kids in for certain defenses or certain parts of the game, and they don't think their kid's always in the right spot that enhances them to be as good as they can be. So
because those parents know them best, right?
Well,
yeah.
In some cases, and one part of that comes down is the culture of sport in general. We all know more. It's on TV all the time, 24/7. You hear all the pundits talking about strategies and so on. So I think some people do think that they know more. But and I want to back off a little bit with parents. In my own experience, most parents are great. Most parents are really great. And I saw that both as a coach, as an AD, and even when I wasn't that long ago, I was a youth sport parent as well. But there just takes a few. Mm-hmm. And part of the challenge is those few can make it very difficult for everyone. And that's the challenge. But it comes to an attitude. I think we have to do more education. I just heard somebody talk the other day. It was an athletic director, and he was talking about his own son, I believe was in 5th grade, playing basketball. And he was one of 30 playing in the travel league in that community. There were another 40 or 50 playing in-house basketball. So there were 70, 80 kids playing basketball in 5th grade. When they're in high school, now in high school there'll be a grade ahead of them and a grade behind them involved too. How many kids are actually going to play varsity basketball? About 8. Mm-hmm. About 8. And so out of those 80 kids, maybe 2 or 3 are actually going to advance to that level. And out of that, how many are going to advance to the college level? It's very, very few. And so what we have to do is realize that as parents, if we don't realize that the experience that the kids have along the way and what they're learning in 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th grade, because eventually they're not going to be able to continue their career, comes to an end. And so make sure that that's a positive experience and we're learning life skills that can help us throughout our lives. That's really what has to be our purpose, not making the varsity or getting that elusive scholarship.
Right. Positive Coaching Alliance, and you guys know about some of the core values there, but one of the elements that Positive Coaching Alliance has in its development zone, if you will, is to help focus, a redirect focus of parents away from the winning. or away from the, ultra competitive, to help support our young people to learn life skills, to be able to adapt. Sports can be a test kitchen to life, right? And no other areas do you learn how to communicate, how to work with others, dedication, commitment, failure, get through anxiety. All those elements can help develop into skills we all want our kids to have. And I think oftentimes we see where the win at all cost, or my kid should be in this right substitution pattern, kind of overshadows that and takes that away. How have you seen some coaches deal with that with coaches or with parents? So you have some high school coaches that you've seen very successful. What have you seen them that maybe we could pass along to some others?
Well, I can remember some coaches, and you got to be careful how you say this, but they won't talk to parents, especially in the older level, because they want the kids, if they have a problem, to come to the coach, because that's part of that learning and growing experience. So I'll be glad to talk to your son or daughter, and we'll work through some of those issues, but that should happen first before we get involved for the parents. I can remember many times where parents would come in and they always want to talk, and they don't want their kid to know that they came in. And well, why not? Because the kid probably didn't want you to come in. A lot of times the kids are better off and understand the situation, but it also goes back to dealing with failure. Part of the thing, and I look back at my son's experience most recently, and it's a few years ago now, but my youngest son, some of the best lessons he learned were through failure. And having to experience that. And that's hard to go through. It's hard to go through as a person, hard to go through as a parent. And sometimes that means maybe not playing as much as you want, or maybe in a tough situation where things don't go well. But those are the lifelong lessons that are going to help you the rest of your life. And I think we just have to keep talking about that. We have some other programs that maybe we can get to a little bit later that we're working on at the high school league that help to teach that. And it really fits in close to what PCA is. And one of the simple ways to say that is our goal is to win, but our purpose is life lessons. And if we can try to learn that, in PCA we talk about second goal coaches and second goal parents. And parents are really stuck on that second goal, which is life lessons, not on the winning part.
Yeah, excellent. Coach Laura, you've coached youth, you've coached amateur, you've coached Olympic athletes, you've coached Division I national champion athletes. So you've seen coaching at all levels over, I won't say how long of a period of time, but how have you seen coaching change? And you can speak to that from the Olympic level, the Division I level, the high school recruitment level, wherever you want to go with that. How have you seen coaching change?
Well, I like a lot of the things that Kevin said because they apply, I think, to pretty much any level. And that focus on winning is a challenge. And I'm as competitive as anybody, believe me. But I think having that perspective of what's really important goes a long way. So I touched base with Brad Frost, who's the current women's hockey coach at the University of Minnesota, because I've been out of college coaching for a while now. I asked him that question, and I mean, he told me that social media is a huge thing. And when I was thinking about that, and I think there's good and bad with social media, but when I thought, what's the big concept with that? I was thinking about how really technology and the ways we communicate have changed, and social media is a part of that. And I still work at the University of Minnesota, and I interact with college-age people. I work with interns who are young graduates, and I really have noticed that they don't have as much experience or interest in, talking one-on-one with somebody, or even talking on the phone. Emails are a lot of work. They want quick things. They want to be able to shoot a text or, a tweet, whatever it may be. And so I think coaches today, pretty much whatever level, need to realize the world we live in because, pretty much everybody has their phone with them all the time. And that takes away from interpersonal interaction as well. And as a coach, I think one of the big things is creating a team and building unity. And it's a little bit more difficult when people are promoting themselves on social media. So I think that's a big one. Another thing he mentioned that I've seen from afar is the recruiting timeline. So from a college perspective, these young athletes are feeling more pressure earlier to decide where they're going to go to college. And that's a challenge in terms of getting to know each other on both sides and trying to figure out what is the best thing to do. And it takes away their focus from what they're doing at the time. So if I'm a ninth grader and I have college coaches wanting to talk to me, how much am I really focusing on my current teammates and what I want to do, at that time, while I'm looking ahead to where I'm going to go to college, and I see my friends committing, and I'm a sophomore and I haven't decided yet. Well, what does that mean? So there's pressure with that, and I think that's a real challenge. And then specialization was the other thing that he mentioned that sounds like is a hot topic for everybody. But I grew up playing high school volleyball, softball, and basketball, and then hockey on the side. And I loved all those experiences. I felt not only physically is it a positive, but just, you're part of a team and you're going through good and bad times and you're learning about leadership and working together and overcoming adversity. And the more experiences I think that you have in those areas, the better off you're going to be in the long run, both on whatever team you're on, but also life in general.
You have coached at the highest female athletic level, right? Olympic, Division I. What do you see, if anything, is a difference between coaching boys and coaching girls?
Okay, so I haven't coached boys, but I've talked to people who have, and then they've coached girls. And it's very interesting because I don't know if you know, but girls and boys are different. So
That's beautiful insight, Laura. Thank you.
there was a coach I knew at the college level they were asked that question, and they said, well, hockey's hockey. And I think we're treating it the same. Well, that male coach didn't last very long in our sport because there are differences. And I think the coaches that are successful, like I said, I didn't coach the guys, but the ones who did and made that transition, the ones that are successful realize differences and try to understand how to deal with those. I would say specifically, one difference is girls and women take things a little bit more literally. So when you're explaining things, they might want to know black and white. What was I supposed to do there? Where was I supposed to go? So my advice on that is for coaches to teach concepts. Get your players to think on their own and read and react to whatever's going on because they will take things literally. They're good at listening. I hear that. These girls listen more than the boys. I hear that. But they take things literally. And they're very social. They want to be part of a group and have fun together. And so if coaches can create a positive environment where they have fun and they get to bond, I think girls really like that maybe even more than guys. But with that, if things aren't going well, there can be what we call drama. And I don't know if anyone here can relate to that, but I've heard that from coaches who have switched over. And they'll talk about, I spent a lot more time dealing with some off-ice things than I did with the guys. So that's just, we're wired differently. So I think those are some of the differences that I've noticed in my career.
As a dad of two daughters, and you coaching at the highest level girls, what would you say to me as how to motivate female athletes?
You're saying as a
guy,
parent?
yeah, as a parent, a male parent, how do you motivate?
Well, just the whole parent dynamic in general, I would say there are a couple of things that I've learned. A couple years ago, I did a couple speaking engagements with kids, with teams, and what I learned was they can be conflicted if the message of the coach is different than the message of the player. And I agree that the parents, they love their kids, they want what's best for their kids. But sometimes they don't realize that what they do and what they say is making it harder on their kid to be successful and to feel good about themselves. And so I think being positive is important. I think letting coaches coach is important. I think if you have honest conversations with your child about, you know, how they feel, I think I think those parents would learn that some things are not beneficial. And just the, you know, what I sense from these athletes that I've spoken to about this, they understand a coach sees their team every day. Okay, they're worried about everybody, whereas the parent is focused on their kid. And so it's a different perspective that, you know, the player understands that, but sometimes they're getting these mixed messages, and it's creating this conflict in their head that, you know, my advice to those players is, I know that your parents are the adults and you're the kid, but if you can have a conversation with them when everyone's calm, to talk about like how that makes you feel and what what you want from your parent, I think those parents would adjust. And so the other thing to your question about motivation, you know, I had a former player's dad say to me once that what he would do is wait, like especially if it wasn't such a good game, or either individually or as a team, he would let his child ask questions or initiate a conversation. Instead of, you're in the car, okay, we're going to talk about the game, and we're going to talk about what you did wrong or what your coach did wrong. You know, just to sort of step back and let that conversation evolve and see what your kid wants to talk about. I think, you know, you're not the coach. You want to love your kid unconditionally. That doesn't mean everything's always rosy and cheerful, but make sure that they know you're their parent first and foremost, and you're not their coach.
I had a watershed moment to that point with my daughter when she was in high school. I won't get into the whole story, but I was trying to be that coach, or trying to help them understand what the coach was doing, saying, you know, their decisions. And she started crying, and she said just real simply, "Dad, I don't need you to be my coach. I need you to be my dad." And it's like, man, where's the hole that I can go dive into? And so I thought of that, and a cliche or a phrase popped in my head is not to be a car coach. And I think every parent, whether you know the sport or not, you want to dissect the game because when you get in the car driving home, because you think the kid wants to talk about it. And often Simon, you would agree to that?
The ride home, we've all heard, is often the part of sport that people least enjoy.
What's the best, you know, psychologically, what's the best approach to working with young people after a game? To your point, that they didn't play well, the team didn't play well, whether I'm a coach or a parent, you know, everybody's different, I understand that, but what's the optimum approach to take psychologically with them?
I'd say the tendency is often parents are hanging on to the result of the game a lot longer than their son or daughter often is. I'd err towards, just like Laura's saying, less is more. Open-ended questions are better than close-ended ones. Asking them simply, you know, what was the best moment in the game today for you? What did you enjoy the most? If you're going to ask them, if anything, it's about, I often talk about controllables, attitude, preparation, and effort. So you certainly as a parent say, you know, how do you think you're... But even that, after a game that didn't go well, can be viewed defensively. Give them space. Talk about, you know, going to see a movie or whatever else is coming up. It's not your job to help them dissect the game unless they're really seeking that from you.
Good.
Can I jump in for
Yeah,
a quick
please do,
comment?
Kevin.
We've had some situations when you talk about the kids and what their parents' role should be, and it's hard sometimes for kids to talk directly to parents about that. So we're aware of some situations where what the coach has done with the team, he's had the kids have gotten together and they've created kind of a list of, here's how we want you as parents, here's how you can best support us. So it's a little bit more impersonal, but they have a list of 8 or 10 things, and it includes the car ride home, and includes what to say from the stands and what not to say, and let our coach be the coach and you be the parent. And it works out quite well.
I like
Great
it.
idea.
That is a great idea. A player-generated parent code of conduct.
Exactly
Nice.
it. Yep.
Nice. Reverse the roles. Dr. Heather, Do you mind if I call you Dr. Heather?
You just call me Heather.
Okay, all right. Because I don't have to give a copay, so I can just call you Heather, right? Okay. All right. As an orthopedic physician, you're regularly treating athletes of all ages, you know, the weekend warrior to the novice, you know, youth, adult. What trends are you seeing from your practice with youth athletes that are driving the way you are treating them or have to change the way you're treating them? What's the biggest things out there? I'm sure concussion is one. What else?
Yeah, so more and more injuries, a lot of overuse injuries, and burnout. And the forces that are driving those trends are youth sports specialization, year-round play. But what's driving those trends is parental peer pressure and money, right? So as parents, we want to provide the best opportunities for our kids to succeed in sport, but we are completely misguided, and we are training these kids like little professionals. I have kids that come in complaining of back pain, saying that their coach had them do 500 burpees one day. I mean, 500 burpees, what is the point of that? And you're just going to destroy your team. And so, you know, these kids are, they're not skeletally mature enough, developmentally, emotionally mature enough to be trained like this. And unfortunately, they are customers. They're not young athletes. So we really focus on encouraging them to play multiple sports year-round. And that doesn't mean that you're playing soccer, hockey, and lacrosse all at the same time. That's actually when I see more injuries, is when these kids are going from sport to sport to sport. And you know, play the sport of the season. And studies show, like Kevin said, that can reduce the incidence of injury and of burnout and keep them playing longer and doing what they love.
So we're going to get to sports specialization in a moment, but as a physician who's treating these athletes, if there was one thing that you could change besides sports specialization, you know, in youth sports, or you could, you know, the coaches association or the high school league or whatever national association said, hey, there's one thing we're going to change and you get to decide what it is, what would it be?
That's a big question. I mean, youth sports culture,
The culture.
the whole thing, the monster it has become. But that's really hard, and that's what we're trying to do with Positive Coaching Alliance, is to educate about how to get back to the roots of why sports are so beneficial, and to create that character building positive environment for our kids.
On the injury aspect of it, what would you say about concussions and how, even as parents, we're treating these? We were talking beforehand where, you know, as most kids now aren't willing to say they have a headache or that they did hit their head. And even if they were, parents might be the, as we were talking about, tough guy, where it's all right, you just got the phrase I always had growing up, my coaches, is you just got your bell rung, right? I don't even know really what that means, but.
It means you have a concussion.
Right. Well, back then, you know, it didn't mean that. It meant suck it up.
Yeah.
But what would you say as far as the concussion element? I know that you could talk an hour, and I've been with you where you've gone through that whole process, but what are some highlights that we as parents can say, I need to take a different focus on that approach?
So I think that the more we learn about concussion, sometimes we realize the less we really know, but I think our management of it has become so much better than it was. Whereas we just said, oh, you're fine, go back in, you just got your bell rung. And now the pendulum has, I think at one point the pendulum swung
maybe
too far
too
the other
far?
way
Yeah.
a little bit, but I think we're in a good place now. And Dr. Amy Custer is going to be talking about this in a panel later on too. So she's really the expert with that and can talk more about it. But I think, you know, these kids, we have one brain, and we need to protect that and really take these seriously, and not be pressured by our coaches or our peers to get back to play before you're ready.
All four of you are going to answer this next question. If you're writing a job description for a coach, youth, high school, whatever it might be, what would you say are the key elements that a coach should be possessing to coach at any level nowadays? Now, I understand there's different levels of expertise, but some basic core principles that you would say maybe through experience have gone away that need to be reinstituted. We've mentioned a few of them, culture, those types of things. But what are some key elements that a coach should have besides X's and O's? Start with you, Coach Laura.
Well, the thing that comes to my mind, I remember that we had our volleyball coach, Mike Hebert, at the University of Minnesota, and I remember sitting down with him one day. We were talking about different books that we both enjoyed, and I said, Mike, if you could say, what is the one thing that's most important for a coach? What's the one quality? And he said that the players know you believe in them. And I thought, that's great. I mean, it's not about, I mean, I agreed with that 100% because what I found is, again, I'm all about team. I've always played team sports. We have to work together, and to do that, you want to encourage your players. You want to let them know that you do believe in them, and that, you know, if your motivation is about yourself or it's strictly about winning, I think that's going to come back to bite you at some point. And even myself, when I would coach at the Division I level or with some national team experiences that I've had, I had to remind myself, why am I coaching? You know, I got into coaching because I wanted to make a positive impact on people, on kids, on athletes, whoever. Hockey was a platform. It was a vehicle to do that. And I think that's a perspective thing that sometimes coaches can lose sight of. And so to me, that's sort of big picture, number one.
Good. Simon?
I'd say great coaches need to be great observers, not only to be able to teach the specifics of their sport, but to be able to understand all of the individuals that make up a team, if it's a team sport. So I think being a great observer, and if they have that, the ability to connect with all kinds of players. Most coaches normally have tons of passion for their sport, and they're very competitive people naturally. And they can relate to similar kind of players normally very well. But they need to be able to connect and be an important person for all of the players on their team. And so having that adaptability to connect would be another thing I'd build into that job description.
I agree with that to the point where I think sometimes our coaches have gone, the pendulum, if you will, has swung too far, that they're too analytical, too X's and O's. It's all about, you know, even going into any youth sport practice, majority of the time in a practice, they're putting in an offense or a defense, right? Which is part of it, but not the fundamentals. Or, again, talking back about growing, you know, teaching life lessons, building character, getting to know the individuals and help them grow, is definitely something that's kind of got pushed away in this win-at-all-cost competition level. So the Minnesota State High School League, I'm sure, deals with, you know, training coaches, and it's always a topic. We, you know, probably from school ADs, how do we train our coaches? How do we get them better in this area? What one area or two would you say has to come back into the forefront of a coach?
Well, the most important thing, I think, is as I grow and learn more and more, is you have to hire, well, I learned a long time ago, you hire personality, because you don't change that. You can teach, people can learn X's and O's, they can learn strategies of the game, but your personality of the coach is what you get. And I think one of the most important qualities, or maybe the most important, is that they care about kids. It's very similar to what you said about believing in them, but the kids need to know that you care about them. That's maybe one of the biggest motivators for them to perform. And along with that, we need coaches of high moral character. Sports don't teach character. There's studies out there, in fact, that show that the longer you're in sport, the worse your character might get. And there are things, think about it, and as you go to the higher levels and so on, and some of the things that we see, because of the win at all costs and the pressures and the money involved and everything else, can destroy our moral character as well. What sports can do is it can be a platform where coaches of high character can use sports to teach character. And that's where it has to happen. And the way they do that, one of the best things with the caring is building relationships with their kids. And that helps them to observe things so that when things are going wrong, whether it be something mentally or physically or whatever, they're more likely to catch on to that. So they have to build that relationship. And what we've learned is that teams that do that, and they still have to have the X's and O's, and they have to condition and do those things, but those are usually the most successful teams. Your most successful teams have that chemistry, or that togetherness, and the relationships that are built with each other and with the coach. So it really comes down to caring, relationship type coaches. We talk about, with one of the programs we're working with now, is transformational coaches versus transactional coaches. And a transactional coach says, if you do this for me, you can play. Block a little harder, jump a little higher, whatever, and you can play. A transformational coach will do the things I was just talking about.
It's interesting that transformational versus transactional, that carries on well beyond sports, doesn't it? Relationships,
All over.
family, business. So again, which is something Positive Coaching Alliance is trying to teach, is it's well beyond the playing field, the ice, the court. From a medical perspective, or even as a parent perspective, what do you think a coach needs to refocus on now?
I think that the coach has to set the tone, set the positive culture of the team. And they have to, just like in parenting, you have to set those expectations early and often. And it's the coach's responsibility to keep that culture positive. And there's so many times where it starts out that way, but then the dynamics of the kids interacting, things start to turn, and really the coach needs to be aware of that happening and constantly reset it. What do you think as a trainer
What do
for
I think?
PCA?
Wow, man, my week is done. I've been asked what I think. No, no, I think it is the culture. I think it's everything we've said, and unfortunately, there's not one magic answer or one elixir that fixes it all. But I think it all does come down to culture, because all these elements we talked about are built within a culture, right? So whether it's my home culture that I want to model, positive, filling emotional tanks, helping them understand that mistakes are going to happen, all these types of things that are in the culture, it's trying to figure out what is the most important. And unfortunately, I think, and many of us can have experienced it, it's that win at all cost. And I would say, from a coaching perspective, I understand there's different levels. The level Laura coached at, I mean, it was you had to win or you lose your job, right? So there is that part I understand, but if it could get back to having fun, building kids up, it sounds weird, but I would want to put top in a coach's job description the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Honor others the way you want to be honored. Honor the game the way you would want it honored. So thank you for asking. Very nice. Well,
Troy,
we got a couple of moments here, but any closing comments?
So just quick, you mentioned fun, and every survey I've ever seen with kids, especially at the high school level, when they rank what's important to them, fun's always the most important.
Right.
I just heard a stat the other day from a survey they did. Winning and losing was like 40th on the list. And we forget about that, because the kids are more concerned about their relationships and how they feel. And fun means a lot of it. That doesn't just mean a bunch of jollies. You can have fun by working hard and accomplishing your goals as well. So there's a lot of good things that have to go into that, but I think we lose sight of that too many times.
We've lost sight of a lot, and hopefully today you guys will hear some other panels that will kind of refocus us back to Simon, where we started on focusing. I think that this is great, and I appreciate Players Health for having this workshop summit, to be able to kind of refocus in different areas. So Coach Laura, Simon, Kevin, Dr. Heather, thank you for your time, and we appreciate you guys listening, and hopefully there's a little bit that you can pull out of this and take back with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Yeah.
Good job, sir. Yes, sir.
Moderated by Tim McNiff, the news anchor for KARE 11's Sunrise, Minnesota. We're going to have Nick Ryson, the Director of Business Development, Positive Coaching Alliance, 8-year NFL veteran. Otis Grigsby, 6-year NFL veteran, General Counsel for Players Health. And Corey Koski, 19-year Major League Baseball veteran. Please welcome them.
Welcome, gentlemen. Good morning. For this panel, I just want to try to save a couple minutes at the end. So if somebody with the facility wants to give me the high sign, we're about 10 minutes out, because these guys are, I think, if your parents, maybe you want to know how does Johnny get where these guys got, and if you have any of those questions or what they're doing with their kids, I want to give you that opportunity to ask those questions. So just know that'll happen. Of our panel up here, we have 3 former professional athletes, 2 from football and 1 from baseball. So we don't have maybe the breadth of some of these other sports that we could draw on, but we're all going to do the best we can. What we want to do today is we want to take a deeper look at the impact of being a multi-sport youth athlete. We're going to talk about the ongoing debate regarding youth athletes specializing in sports too early. We'll hear from professional athletes who were multi-sport athletes as youth growing up and whether they thought this impacted their path to the pros. Is that, and I'll just throw this out there, and I'll start with Nick, is that common? Because this sports specialization seems to be sort of a more recent trend. Did you grow up playing multiple sports?
Absolutely. I grew up in a small town of 9,000 people in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, and really they didn't have enough athletes actually to play all the sports. So my senior year, I actually lettered in 5 sports. I did football, basketball, wrestling, track, and baseball, and lost about 20 pounds in a month playing basketball and wrestling at the same time. My mom thought, what's wrong with you? Because I was eating everything out of the house. But it's something that my favorite sport, even though I played professional football, my favorite sport was whatever season I was in. And whether that be basketball and whether that be wrestling, it's just something that we're able to challenge ourselves and do something different. And each sport has something to offer for potentially the professional sport that you're going to play, whether that be, wrestling in terms of your balance and anticipation of, movement in terms of jumping and foot skills versus, playing basketball, and then track for speed and baseball for hand-eye coordination. I think that there's so much attributes that you can take from other sports that, can help you further your career down the road. And then obviously we're talking about safety and overuse of, actually my current job now, we're ensuring, professional baseball players and pitchers. And one of the biggest things we look at is, well, how many years have they pitched? And is that all they do? Because we're looking at Tommy John surgery and UCLs and pitchers' elbows, and whether or not I actually want to insure them, if they would be considered a good risk. So yes, it's a big part even as a youth athlete, but even as they're further down the road as a professional.
I want you guys to know too, if I ask one question of one of you and you want to add in on something like that, just put finger up and let me know that you want to add something to that. So Otis, could you talk about your experience?
Yeah, so with my experience, I played multiple sports. My first sport was soccer. They made me play goalie, so I didn't get much action at 5. But I played baseball. Baseball was my first love, really. Played football, basketball, and I was good at some sports, not so good at others. But I think just to add to Nick's point, playing multiple sports helped me connect with people in different sports, and there's different types of personalities. There's different team dynamics, and I think that made me a more whole person. And I never had to deal with the sports specialization. It's a kind of, I don't want to call it crazy, but it's an interesting thing that's happening, and I definitely don't really like it. So yeah.
So Corey, I just have to set this up by saying when Corey was playing for the Minnesota Twins, I was working as a sports caster at that time. And I don't know how many times you were probably asked about the crossover growing up in Canada between hockey and ultimately what you ended up doing playing baseball. Could you speak on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, has anybody here watched Sesame Street? Remember back in the day, Sesame Street? It's like, which one of these guys is doing their own thing? It's like it's a football thing, I'm in a baseball thing. I'm like, which guy is out of place here?
Wait, I thought that was me.
Yeah. So there was, the one thing as I was, because when I first started playing baseball, I didn't really start playing baseball until I was 19 years old. And learning the game later in life has helped me out significantly now, because when I was going through all the stuff, trying to learn how to play the game of baseball, learn how to catch a ball, how to hit a ball, it's a lot of the stuff what a lot of 8, 9, 10-year-old, 12-year-olds are going through right now. And I had a lot of difficulty fielding a ground ball. I made it to the big leagues because I can hit a little bit, and I can catch a ground ball every once in a while. And TK hated. TK was a big defensive guy. And I remember the story where, where I would go out and I'd get guardy before every practice. And we, playing baseball, we play every day. Unlike the football guys, they can only handle it once a week. We played every day. So
We'll have comments later.
But anyways, so I went out and grabbed Gardy every day, and we would take ground balls, and I really struggled taking ground balls. And he would get, at one point, he just got really, really frustrated with me, and he goes, dude, didn't you play hockey? And I'm like, well, yeah. He goes, weren't you a hockey goalie? And I was like, yeah. He goes, well, didn't you play volleyball and could jump like the highest in Canada? And I was like, yeah. He goes, well, you're an athlete. Be an athlete. Stop trying to be like every other baseball player out there and just be athletic. And I'm like, oh, I can just do that? He goes, look, we don't care what you look like as long as you catch the ball and throw it over there before that guy running gets there, we're all happy. And I'm like, well, that's all I have to do? Because I thought I was doing right, left, split, do it this way. He's like, no, just get the ball over there before that guy gets there, we'll be happy. I'm like, oh, okay, well, can I borrow your hat? And he's like, yeah. So I took his hat, threw it over there, grabbed my hat, threw it over there, I said, okay, now try to score on me. And from there, he just would hit the ball as hard as he can, and I would pick it and try to do stuff, and that just was freeing for me. And so that was kind of a scenario in which playing the other sports actually helped me. And if any of you watched me play, that's why I kind of fell into my own little niche, is playing hockey like a goalie, like trying to make that glove save. And that was probably the most exciting time for me, playing defense on the Metrodome, is when somebody hit it to my left and I was able to do one of these big glove saves. Remind me back in the day of Grant Fuhr and that stuff. So that was my hockey, because I grew up, my dream was to play NHL hockey, and I just wasn't good enough. So I ended up playing baseball.
Not a bad consolation. Otis, you mentioned that you said baseball was my first love. So you ended up playing football.
Yeah. So I grew up a huge Braves fan, and my dad wanted me to be a pitcher, and it was something that he didn't really know how to teach me about, but he really wanted me to do. So I watched all these like Greg Maddux pitching videos and whatever else he could come up with, and we'd practice like every day. So I'd go to practice with my teammates, and then after practice I'd come home and we'd go to the yard and just pitch until the sun went down. And I got frustrated over and over and over again. So eventually I would start doing things like throwing wild pitches on purpose. I'd throw it in the dirt and see if I could skip into his crotch. And when he got frustrated with that, I'd throw balls into the fence and break boards. And it was something that I really loved, but I felt like it just wasn't necessarily the best fit. And I also got pushed towards football by my coaches in high school. Once things became apparent that I was better at football, my high school baseball coach told me just not to try out for the team the next year. And it was really weird. And at the time, I thought, man, maybe this guy just doesn't like me or something. But looking back on it now, I know that they saw me as an asset in football and they wanted to develop me. So maybe in a certain kind of way, I started that whole sports specialization path as a junior in high school.
So the last panel we had both a school administrator and an orthopedic surgeon who both could speak on this subject, in different ways. And obviously, I'm not going to ask any of you guys to go down that road, so you're welcome. But talking about this whole phenomenon of sports specialization, I'd never heard of anybody playing basketball and wrestling at the same time. I thought for sure you'd tell me it was baseball and track. That I could see, but I couldn't. I just can't even see what you did and how you did what you did. So how did you end up in football?
Well, I think Otis made a good point when he was first talking that when you're younger, the reason you don't want to specialize too early is because you don't know the sport that you actually love. You don't know the actual sport that you're actually going to be good at, because eventually all of our bodies from youth athletes, they change and they morph and they grow, and you're somebody different than you were when you were younger. And that's the first part. But then in terms of how did I end up in football I thought I wanted to be a 6'2" white basketball player, but that wasn't in the cards for me. Even though I was able to perform at a high level and during both those sports, but truly I love the contact. I love that team camaraderie that truly nothing teaches you about needing and trusting the person next to you than playing football. I think as we talk about safety and we talk about football as a whole, I think the intangibles that I gained from playing this sport is something that I would never give up for the life of me. I think being able to have to trust the guy next to me, because if we're not all on the same page, if my D lineman and I take the same gap because I was a linebacker, there's an A gap, and that running back's going to find it. They're good enough at the pro level that they're hitting their head on the goalpost and strike up the band, and we just lost the game. But you have to be able to trust and count on the person next to you. Plus, it's also a sport that is very violent, not like baseball. And the reason we can only play it once a week is because our bodies do need to have recovery. And that's why they get to take days off. You get 15 DL, 15-day DL, right? you hurt your finger, right? bit the hangnail. Okay, you can come back later.
Well, there is a funny story about there. Actually, a guy did go on a DL for his hangnail.
There you go.
And he slid into second base. I can't remember who it was. He played for the Angels, and he came up. Oh, I wish I could remember who it was. He slid into second base, and I thought he broke his finger. He was like, ah! And he was screaming, and I was at third base. I'm like, man, I hope he's okay. And then a trainer ran out there, and he comes out, and he pulls out a Band-Aid, and he wraps it on his finger. I'm like, dude, seriously right now? if you go out to the point where the trainer runs out, you got to be off the field. And he pulled it and put a Band-Aid on it. Gosh. During the course of, I will remember who this guy is at some point during the course of this day.
Well, so eventually, there was one point we had two different people insured. One was a baseball player, and he had stabbed himself with a pen somehow. I think he was a pitcher. And then there was another one that was a quarterback, and he had like 3 herniated discs in his back or his neck. And which one came back sooner? The football player with 3 herniated discs in his back versus the guy who stabbed himself with a pen. So there's a difference that, I talk about the team game. I talk about being able to deal with adversity and what football teaches you and taught me. Plus, my grandfather played for the Packers in 1946, and my brother played for the Arizona Cardinals. So it was kind of in my blood and in the pipeline that this is what I was going to do.
I had this big experience as a high school football coach. The team I was coaching for was preparing for the Prep Bowl with state championship in the large school classification. And the high school hockey tryouts were going on at the same time. And I had a player who was a JV running back come up to me and say, can I leave early to go to tryouts? I go, when do you want to leave? And I told him, I go, okay, you can do it, but don't say anything. So he leaves, and we think we pulled this off. And so the next day, we're at practice again. It's about that same time, and all of a sudden the head coach starts yelling for that kid. So I'm like, they're looking around, and he's my kid. And so I start looking at my plays, and head coach comes over and says to me, where's Hallie? And I said, Hallie, where's Hallie? Like, I don't know. And he said, did you let him go to hockey? And I said, yes, I did. And he goes, you know what we're practicing for. You know what this means. And I said, you know, if you don't let him go to hockey tryouts, you'll never get another hockey kid again. You never will. And he said, you're right. So I'm wondering, you guys, what sacrifices did you have to make?
Wow.
Or any regrets to the decision or the path you chose to take?
So I had to sacrifice band. So my first year playing football was the 7th grade. I only signed up for football because all my friends were doing it. In Texas, everyone starts at 5. So I was super late. I had no idea what was going on, but it's like everyone's doing it, so I'll do it too. And I was also signed up for band. So, I came to practice the first day. I said to my coach, hey, coach, band practice is at the same time as football practice. So when will I be able to go to band? And he said, you won't. And that was it. And I look at musicians now and I think, man, that could have been like the next Jimi Hendrix or something, But here I am, pro football player, which is not a bad place to land. But so I sacrificed that. I think as you go higher up in the ranks, you sacrifice a little bit of time for education. I graduated in the top like 6% of my class in high school, and grades was always something that was important to me. But you get to college, and now you're essentially like a professional athlete, light, right? You have a full-time job where they block off 6 hours of your day. You're in practice, you're in meetings, film, weight room, and then you've got your study time. But there's a block where you just can't even go to a certain class. So when I went to Kentucky, I started out as an engineering major, and I met the dean of the College of Engineering. It was great. And that first week of practice, I showed up 5 minutes late because of a class. They knew I'd be there late. And I got demoted from second string middle linebacker to like 5th string. So now I'm on practice squad, practice squad essentially, which is fine if that's where I deserve to be. But if I'm being punished because I'm pursuing my education, that's a little disappointing. And I ended up going the interior design route after I suggested that, hey, maybe I could do architecture. And they said, well, yeah, that doesn't fit with our schedule. You've got classes after midnight with architecture, so you can't do that. They suggested interior design. I laughed and eventually thought, well, I can just come back and do architecture later. I mean, now I'm a lawyer, and it's all worked out, but that's a thing that you sacrifice, and a lot of people do care about, the student athlete. They want you to be a great athlete, but it's hard to be amazing at both. And I'm just really impressed by people like, Myron Roll, for instance, who's a doctor now and played pro football. It's amazing.
Corey?
There's a concept that I try to talk to my kids about, that I coach. It's here's what you want. Are you willing to do what it takes to get what you want? And so, we're in a culture, we're in a society right now that everything's given to them. And so are they really willing to do what it takes to get what they want? Well, if it's too hard, they don't really want that. And anybody who does anything, who has had any success in this world, I've been lucky enough that because I was able to play a professional sport. I don't have the educational background. I got a high school degree from Canada, if that means anything here.
It does on South Park.
Yeah. And so, from an academic, I don't have a strong academic background. But the sacrifices that you have to be willing to take, because, like I said, lucky enough that I'm around a lot of successful people now who've had success in business, who started their company and doing this stuff, and everybody says they want to be a millionaire. Everybody wants to be this. Everybody wants to be that. But are you willing to do what it takes to get to where you want? And so, we talk about the sacrifices that sports that we do, that the kids do in sport. I know I kind of went on a little tangent here, but we talk about, there's this fight right now. You hear everybody talk about everything I read about. They talk about the millennials and the participation awards. Oh, everybody, we're in this world right now because everybody's got a medal for just participating. Well, if we really break that down and we really evaluate it and really think about what it means to participate in a youth sport, why don't we give people medals? And why don't we celebrate their participation in it? Because for somebody to participate in a youth sport requires sacrifice. They're going to have to show up to the event consistently, because once you manage employees, showing up is actually a pretty cool trait to have with your employees, because not everybody shows up. So to actually show up, and then the second point of that is you think about this for another point, is it's really easy for the really good guys to show up. What about the 95% of the people who are okay? And what about the bottom 10% of people where they're showing up and they're getting their teeth kicked in every day, but they show up? So, that's a sacrifice for them. They're not sick, they're feeling good, they're made fun of, because every time they step on the ice, some kid walks them. And in the dynamic of a locker room, they're gonna feel that and they're gonna hear it. But they show up every day. So as we got these two groups of people, one mocking the people for giving the participation award, and I would wish we would do a better explanation of what participation means. But for these kids to show up every day for a youth sport event, for practices, they deserve recognition for that. That is a participation award, because it's deeper than that. And so it's a sacrifice that these kids are making on a daily basis to try to participate in the sport. And my sacrifices, obviously, I had to make a lot of sacrifices to get to. Anybody who's had any success has had to make sacrifices. So I don't know if my sacrifices are any different than your guys' sacrifices in the room. You have to make choices along the way that you're not going to be able to do certain things. And we all make sacrifices to kind of get what we want. And I was lucky enough that I had a supporting cast around me that supported me in the sacrifices that I chose to make.
I don't think I'd ever considered that I made sacrifices, because the reason you give up something is because you want to attain something greater than what you think is attainable. And I was very fortunate to have a mother that we'd sit down every single day, or before the year started, and set goals and say, all right, well, my end goal was I want to make it to the NFL. Okay, well, that's a big goal. It's going to take you about 10 years to get. So let's start with a smaller goal. That's something that's much more tangible and attainable within a 6-month, 3-month time period. So we go down B honor roll, C honor roll, A honor roll, whatever it may be. And then I wanted to be a starter on this team. I wanted to make this. I want to make all conference. I wanted to make this. So there's things that are attainable that says, you know what, I want to get the NFL. Let's go backwards. Let's take steps backwards every single time, because I always talk about to kids, and one of the greatest things I ever learned was I went to the NFL Rookie Symposium in 2002 when I was drafted by the New York Giants. And there's 3 words: choices, decisions, consequences. This is something I talk to my 9-year-old daughter all the time is, when you have a goal, well, we all have choices in life. Show up to work, we don't show up to work. Show up to practice, don't show up to practice. Put in the extra time working on our stick skills or our ball skills or whatever we're going to do. And that decision that you make will inevitably be the consequences that you will have to live with the rest of your life. If we decide not to show up to work, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get fired. You may lose your house. You may lose your family members, whatever it may be. That's a consequence based off the decision that you made. So I look at it and say that I made these decisions because I wanted to attain this goal. And it's something, going past my end of my career, I went and got my MBA at Northwestern University, and I learned something about what energy is. And there's two different things with water, right? There's a river that has banks and it's moving all in one direction, creating a great flow and great focus, versus someone who's unfocused, which would be considered a flood. And a flood has great, tremendous ability to cause and wreak havoc because they don't have those borders and they don't have those goals. They aren't going to one direction to work together. So I would say that I never gave up anything and I never sacrificed anything, because at the same time, I was going after what I wanted to. And had I not reached it, some people say the best things you can do is fail. Fail early, fail often, because that's when you're going to learn, that's when you're going to grow. When you're uncomfortable, you're going to grow as an individual and you're only going to get better. The longer we sit and be comfortable, my wife kicks me in the what all the time and says, get your stuff together, get out there and go do what you're supposed to do. I never would have gone to Northwestern had she not pushed me, but I had to get outside of my comfort zone and push myself, and now I'm in this position where I'm at now.
Before we came up here, I asked Corey, and I don't know Otis or Nick, we just met before he walked up here, so I don't know your backgrounds other than what was on that brief thumbnail bio.
Sure.
So my question for Corey was, you have boys, and is it okay if I ask, what you're doing now? Because now you're in it. You're in it as a parent and as a coach, and your kids will face that pressure, or you as a parent might face that pressure to attend the fall camp or play fall ball or whatever it is, and your child may have a different viewpoint of what it is that they want to do. So what I want to do is offer for any one of the 3 of you, if you are currently a parent, how are you handling this? Or if you are not there yet, what you think you might do, if that's fair, and if I could start with Corey.
So besides screwing up every day, any of you guys who have kids, you know what that's like. It's tough because what I'm really struggling with is I've been there, I've done it. I've been with the best in the world at what we've done, and we've all had somewhat of a similar path to get there. The multi-sport, the taking time off, it's just, there's different, there's genetics, the genetic component of it, and then there's a skill acquisition, and there's the passion, and we spend all this time on skill acquisition. We can't spend any time on genetics, so that it is, but we don't spend any time on the passion. And so I'm sitting here and watching the world go, and I feel like I'm way over there because my view of how to get somebody to where they need to get to is completely different than the rest of the world. So I'm fighting this uphill battle, and as soon as you try to say anything, you come across as kind of, potentially a know-it-all, and that's sometimes how I feel, because I just see these people going down this path that I know that leads to mediocrity. Because really, if you want to be different, you can't go down the path of everybody else, because everybody isn't going to get to the NHL. Everybody isn't going to get to the NFL. Everybody isn't going to get to the major leagues. So why, if you want to get there, why do you choose to go down the path of everybody else? Why don't you look for something to be special, to be different, to do this different stuff? So the battle I face on a daily basis is I have all my kids' friends and their parents going down this road. And, so my kids want to go down this road too, And so we allow them to go down this road, but I know it's not getting them better, and I have this frustration. And it's so frustrating because I see the drills and I see the stuff that these experts are teaching my kids, and I know that this isn't really what they need, but I allow this to happen, and it's frustrating because there's nothing really out there to really separates itself, because the real path to get to real greatness, the immune response system to the youth sport concept would kick them out and spit them out, and they would get ostracized out of the dynamic. So, my kids go on this path. I kind of allow this to happen, but I don't push my kids. I allow them to go, and then I just ask them questions, and then I try to allow them. I give the autonomy to make their own decision making, and then I'll try to work with them outside, like for example, baseball, for example. So I have my kids. They go do stuff. They want to go hit with this guy, and it's frustrating because I know that he can't teach hitting, and I feel bad, but I don't know how you guys do. Like anybody who's I don't want to compare my dog. Look, I'll just keep it in the realm of sport. Like I know baseball, and I sometimes knew how to hit, and sometimes I could hit, but I couldn't hit all the time. But I know, what I do know is that I don't know that much. And the more I learned about stuff, the more I realized how little I actually know about stuff. Now I go to this guy who I'm actually paying is telling me that he knows everything. And I'm like, okay, I played 15 years in professional sports, 9 of them at the highest level. I got 4,000 or 2,000, however many at-bats, and I don't quite really feel like I understand that. And you're telling me you played high school baseball and you understand that? And so I really struggle with that dynamic. So a very long-winded way to answer your question is that I try to manage it, and I manage it very, frustratingly, but I allow them to kind of do the stuff. And when they start asking questions, and when they get to the age where they actually can do something, that's kind of when I step in, because really it doesn't matter what I do for a baseball swing between the ages of 15 and under, because they're just not strong enough to have a good baseball swing. So I let them do all that stuff, and when I can start hammering in when they're actually strong enough to now have some proper technique, that's kind of when I step in, but I allow them to do all this stuff. And then when they're usually 15, 16 now, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, you know what, you were right 3 years ago. Okay, I see that now. So it's tough. It's really difficult, because as we, the youth sports is a $36 billion or $40 billion or $27 billion industry, and I feel bad because these guys are putting bread on their table with what they're selling, these kids, and they're selling hopes and dreams, and so it's a really tough balance to walk, because I don't want to, but it's just there's people who are really struggling to try to make these payments to you, and so it's a dynamic that I really struggle with.
Otis?
So I don't have kids, but one day I will. And whenever that happens, I'm going to tell them, you can be whoever you want to be, right? I think every parent tells their kids that. And I'm not going to push my kids in sports. I want them to play, and I want them to try many different sports. But the number one thing is the education is paramount. Like I don't care if you are the worst baseball player, basketball player. If you're the best, you have to have that education, because when it's over, it ends at some point. Some people get to play a lot longer than others, but you have to bring something to the table every single day, and you can't rest on whatever you did in the past. So it's all about adding value in your relationship. So I just want my kids to know that I'm there for them. I support what they're doing. If you engage in a sport, you're not quitting until the season's over. And as far as with what sport they want to play, it doesn't matter to me. So I think I'm just going to try to keep as hands-off of approach as possible. But I may have kids who just want that from me, and if that's what they want, I'll just dig in and research for them. Anytime anyone asks me a question, I'm going to spend way too much time trying to figure out the answer. I'm going to give you so many different options. You're going to be like, okay, last time I asked you for something. So my kids might be the same way. But yeah, I I imagine it must be really difficult with the, the select teams, and your kids want to be a part of that group, right? Your friends are doing this, and one thing my dad taught me, he was a pastor growing up, and he taught me how to really just avoid following the crowd. I didn't go to parties when I was a kid. They started going to parties in the 6th grade. I don't think I made it to my first party until maybe my junior year in high school. And that was because now I'm like this big athlete and I'm supposed to go. But I'd go home early. And I want them to know that, you build your own path. Like Nick was saying, set your goals, understand that what other people want you to do, it's a lot of times it's just not aligned with where you want to go. So just stay focused.
And I have 2 children. I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 22-month-old boy. But after listening to the first panel, my mind is like, what the hell was I doing? But I give my daughter options. She has a goal. Her goal. She's 9 years old. She's figured out she wants to play soccer at Notre Dame. All right, well, let's find how you can get there. And my number one thing to her is not that she has to work on her right foot and her left foot. So she has to be ambidextrous in both. But she has to have the grades. I said, this is the biggest number one thing. It's not an athlete student. It's called a student athlete. And similar to what Otis says, it is your academics. Because guess what? If you don't have your academics, you could be the best athlete in the world. And guess where you're going to have to go? You're going to have to go to JUCO. You're going to have to start there and go and build your way up. Because, like you said, the average career in the NFL is 3 years. Imagine you get drafted at 22, and you last the average, that's just the average. Now you're 25. And now the average age of retirement is 65. You got 40 years. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? And that's why you want to have an education behind you and something that you can rest your hat on other than your sports. Because listen, I know going through the NFL that you're only as good as your last play. You're only as good as your last game, and they can quickly get rid of you. They can't get rid of your mind. They can't get rid of the experience that you bring from an academic standpoint. And then in terms of how do I teach them, how do I coach them, my wife put my daughter in swimming, and she got nervous. She had her first meet the other day, and her first thing she was going to do was the 100-meter IM. She had no clue what it was. We were watching the video on YouTube as we're driving to the meet. So she is scared, you know what, right? And she gets in the water, and she does her warm-ups. She gets out, and she's talking to the coach. And we can't be on the deck with them. We're up in the stands. And she comes down, and so I go down, and I ask her, what's wrong? She's like, Dad, I feel like I'm going to throw up. I feel sick. I said, well, that's your nerves. That's because you care. You want to do well. She's like, I don't want to do it. And so eventually the coach says, okay, well, we'll scratch that off, and we'll scratch this off. And I pull the coach over, and I said, you put her on that block, and you let her do it. And it doesn't matter how she does, as long as she puts her head in the water and swims her best and her heart out. She got out of that pool beaming, smile from ear to ear, because she was so happy that she did it and she accomplished it. And that's pushing herself. She's very similar to me. Pushing herself outside of her comfort zone, and she's only going to grow from there. Now she wants to swim more and more and more. So I've got her in 3 different sports. She loves them all. And the hard part, like you said, in terms of specialization, I was a good enough athlete that my basketball coach was trying to pressure my parents into saying, why isn't Nick showing up for summer basketball? Because I was at Wisconsin's football camp, Notre Dame's football camp, and Iowa's football camp. Because I had other things that I had to do. But I was fortunate enough and blessed enough that I was a good enough athlete that I would be able to miss that time and still be the best player on the team. Other kids aren't. They don't have that. And so you got coaches that are pressuring these kids and saying, well, you're not going to then start. And you're going to get, put down, to a lower level because you're not. And I don't know how you do that and work that out with coaches, because I now live in a school district that's got 1,000 kids in one class, and basically you can only play one sport while you're there. So I'm not looking forward to having those conversations down when my daughter gets into high school.
To piggyback off of that, so I have a 17-year-old, so I've kind of been through it. So I've kind of seen this sports specialization evolve through the course of time. And when he was about 13, 14, or probably about 9, 10, I saw a lot of kids playing only hockey all year round. And so now there became all this talk about sports specialization. And so now what I'm seeing is kids playing. So, well, the parent would be, oh, well, you know what? Sports specialization, I need to make a more rounded athlete. So what do? Well, you know what? I'm going to put them in baseball, and then I'm going to put them in lacrosse. Well, now what I'm seeing is kids playing all the sports all year. And so versus the, okay, here's hockey season, here's baseball season, here's soccer season, there's a lot of overlap. And one thing that I've been searching, and there's a lot of smart people in this room that I challenge you and encourage you. I hear in everything I read, I hear about everything that what's wrong with this early sports specialization, this and that. But I haven't been able to find any sort of literature on what good looks like. So if this is our hockey season, that starts here, what should a kid do in the off season, knowing that they're going to play multiple sports? So how much break should they have? How much time should they take off of that sport? 9, 10, 11, 12. What should their time off look like? Is it a complete time off, or do they do this? Because when I was going through my concussion, the doctor told me, he goes, do what you, how did he word it? He goes, do what you think you can. Okay, I'm going to do, because of my personality and where I came from, I was going till I was puking. Well, I guess I can't do that anymore. And so the parents have that same kind of mentality, and that's what basically the message we're telling them. Well, do what you think they can do. And they're like, okay, well, where can I sign them up? I'll sign them up here, because I have the money, and I have the time. I have a nanny. They can take all this stuff, so the kids keep on doing. So where is, if somebody knows where that is, please send it to me, because I've been looking for, okay, this is what the ultimate training schedule should look like. Here's a time frame, because we have it when we work out, we have it on this stuff. What's the rest? Because these kids are going, and there's nothing out there that really says, okay, this is what good looks like. And everybody's saying, well, that's bad, that bad. But what can somebody point me in direction to show me what does good look like?
I love researching. I'll find it for you.
Oh, awesome.
Well, no, I was going to say, you're never going to find it, because what does good look like to whom?
Yeah.
I think I'm just going to say this, and I know we're up against the clock, but I think for a lot of these coaches, it's become a way to supplement their income, and so it's a cash grab. And I've been there and I've seen it when kids have been there and they said, well, you're not going to start on the basketball team because you didn't play summer league. You were conditioning with the football team, and it's used against them. And now the kid has played that sack, says they have to make a choice. Am I going to have the football experience, or am I going to start in basketball? And when you've got a school of 4,000 or 5,000 people, they have a lot of options. So there is that. I know we're up against the clock. Is there anything anybody wanted to ask these gentlemen before we cut them loose? Sir?
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe it's more along the lines of what about your experience with us playing on hockey, stick and ball, basketball?
Pick up basketball.
Yeah.
Pick up basketball. It just seems that not only people all these guys sports, they also play their world pick up.
So is your question about play, just really play?
So,
Fun play.
I have 4 boys, so I think I can take a shot at this. So, in defense to them, to the kids now, we have iPhones. We have, I don't know, whose kid here plays Fortnite for 26 hours a day? They just make up 2 hours. It's unbelievable, this Fortnite. So you got these kids playing. Oh, you play Fortnite, or kids play Fortnite? Oh, geez, okay, well.
What's Fortnite?
I don't know what it is. What is Fortnite?
Fortnite's a video game that these
Okay.
kids play, and it's all consuming for these kids, and one adult. No, I played Fortnite too, so yeah. So, so these kids now have these options, and I guarantee if I had this option, because I grew up on a farm, we had 2 television stations, and one of them was French, and so. And I was like 9 or 17 when Atari came out, and all my buddies had ColecoVision, but Atari, you can only do this so long on for that track and field game for that 1,500 meter deal, and so that was my options. So they have a lot of options that doesn't require any physical activity. I'll give you a story the other day and this could be just bad parenting on my standpoint. So I have this hockey rink in our backyard. Who do you think cleans that thing every time? Me. And I have a 17, 15, 13, and 7-year-old boys. And so the other day I just snapped. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I got my kids in there playing Fortnite, and I'm out here shoveling the rink for them. And my kids, you know, one of my kids made the second highest team on Pee Wee, so he's not a double A, he's an A. But when he made that A team, he's crying, he's bawling because he got screwed, and the world's against him. And so I was like, dude, you're out here playing Fortnite, and I'm out here shoveling the rink. Why do you think, you know, this is what you want, this is what you're willing to do, what it takes? So you think maybe if you shoveled the rink and took some extra, spent all that time working on your stick handling, you might be able to make the better teams? So it's just these kids now, they have so many options that are very easy for them. And we're celebrating non-movement. Like, you know, if a kid's a really good hockey player or really good, we have a society and people like mocking this guy because of this, this, and this, and he's not good at, you know, so we're bringing down all the elite. And so these kids are fighting against this thing, so they have all these other options out there. And I put it all a lot on the parents, because as a parent, what is my option? Go down, force them to do this, and let's go and play, and let's play catch. Well, it's easier for me, hey, you know what, here's your video game, go play Fortnite.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that video games,
No.
okay,
Yep,
yeah, I
yep,
agree
yep.
those video games are a problem, but, you know, a lot of cities, the problem is there just really aren't enough recreational areas. Growing up in Texas, we had a basketball court, asphalt top, and, you know, some people in the neighborhood just didn't really like that there were kids hanging around, you know, until like the late hours of the night playing basketball. So they just like got rid of it. We had a skate park. It was really cool, and actually, I'm the reason why it got shut down. I smashed my face falling off of a ramp, but you know, they got rid of it because I got hurt, and so that was another recreational thing that kids were just doing together, and it was gone. So, you know, there's an issue with video games and your cell phones, but it's also just not enough resources. Just kind of put into these.
Or safety for, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to let my 9-year-old daughter walk, 3-4 blocks. You know, granted, we live in a safe neighborhood, but still, you never know. You walk 3-4 blocks and meet up with kids and go and have a pickup game. And I think that's also where some of the social interaction and kids, you almost have to, parents now, we have to set up play dates for our kids. And it's just not going on in the backyard. And guess what? I used to get in a fight with my brother or his friends or something. And guess what? You have to figure it out. And kids nowadays, they aren't able to figure out because they always have to have someone there as a parent and being with them. And so it's a very different type of world that we're living versus what, you know, listen, it used to be my mom would kick me out at 8 in the morning after having breakfast during the summer and say, all right, be home for dinner before it got dark. And that's what you did. Now, granted, we did a lot of stupid things, but we learned from those mistakes, hopefully.
Yeah, and you can't even go on the bush anymore because you got Lyme's disease and there's all this stuff. You know?
Otis Grigsby, Corey Koski, Nick Greisen, thank you, gentlemen, very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello? Hey, everyone. So yeah, we're about to get started here with our third panel. And we'll kind of get crowd in here really quick. Sure. So our third panel is actually going to be our sports admin panel. Of course, it's going to be moderated by Tim McNiff. We have Andy Coates, the Director of Education for the Minnesota Youth Soccer Association, Sally Johnson, the Executive Director of the National Council of Youth Sports, and Mike Couzone, currently the USA Football Regional Manager and worked 3 years with the USSA Baseball. Thank you.
This is our sports administrator panel. As Tyree just said, Andy Coates, Mike Couzone, and Sally Johnson joining us this morning. And we want to talk about a couple of different issues, one being the role of an amateur sports administrator today and where perhaps we see that evolving in the future. And these are some weighty issues. I don't know what we'll be able to solve today, but we're hoping, I guess, really to have a discussion that helps some administrators out there in the sharing of best practices. So if I could, Mike, if I could start with you, what keeps you up at night? As you sit there as a sports administrator, I mean, you go before your head is pillow at night, what's that thing that keeps eating at you?
Yeah, again, I'm with USA Football. So, I mean, we work with youth and high school football and trying to make the game better and safer. I know two of the guys here, Scott and Kent from Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, we work, hand in hand with them. And one of the things that, keeps myself as well as, the rest of USA Football up at night is, again, the participation numbers are down so much that in a lot of communities, they are getting rid of youth football in general. So, as a generation might go by, there might be, hundreds of thousands of kids that will not have the experience of playing youth football within their community, with their friends, developing all of the, all the positives that come with the sport that were talked about in the last panel, that might be missed by, by a handful of communities. And, we're doing everything we can to get those participation numbers to hopefully steady and then increase, because again, the football as well as, all youth team sports in general have so much to offer, the kids that are playing.
Sally?
I love this question. About 2 years ago, I was at a concussion summit, and the room was filled with about 40 individuals, those of which 39 were men. And we went around the room and introduced ourselves, and the first person said their name and where they were from, and as it went around the room, all of a sudden it was like, well, I'm so-and-so, and I had 3 concussions, and then we went to the next one, and they had 5, and the next person had 7, and the other had 11, and I was near the end of the introductions. And when it got to me, I said, my name is Sally Johnson, and I proudly serve as the Executive Director of the National Council of Youth Sports. I've never had a concussion. The room went silent, like, oh, this woman. I said, however, our members work with 60 million registered participants, 40 million actual boys and girls, because some of those youngsters play more than one sport. I've never had a concussion, but I do bang my head against the wall often. And what really keeps me up is the communication, the media. And when I say media, I no longer mean electronic and paper press. I mean the media today are the parents and the fans and the athletes who are in the stands who have their iPhones on them, and they're taking pictures of a fight that broke out between 2 parents, and suddenly it's posted on social media and being shared on and on and on. So we are no longer just battling the positive messages and trying to have the traditional media highlight the player of the week and the coach of the year and so forth, but we're battling messaging and a positive message on all of the good benefits of sport.
Andy, you seem to be with soccer. It's a sport that has just skyrocketed in terms of participation. But I imagine with some other sports may eye that enviously. There've got to be some issues that you have with that sort of rapid growth.
Yeah, it has. But then again, the Aspen Institute, they put out a good study every year the last few years, and participation is declining in soccer as well. So it's not just a football or a concussion issue. It's most sports. Most youth sports are declining in population, as hard as that is for some of us to believe, because it just seems like it's ever present and everybody does it. But more kids are maybe dropping out earlier, or they're specializing earlier, so participation numbers are decreasing. So that keeps me up at night, not just because of the quantity of kids, the number of kids who are potentially not having a sport experience, but for me it's more about the quality of experience they have. Because if it were a great experience, they'd stay with it, they'd pull more kids in. Some of them are leaving because they're not having a positive enough experience. And as we've said in the other panels, I found myself nodding my head a lot. A lot of other options that kids have these days. So the competition for their leisure time is pretty fierce.
In the first panel discussion today, we heard comments regarding, and it was talking about the coaching experience, but they got into this whole thing of trying to make a positive experience for the kids, and then the involvement of parents and how that all enters into it. As administrators, how do you balance that whole thing of trying to have a league with wins and losses, coaches dealing with kids, and then there's parents who ultimately want the best for their child. And that has to be a fuel for conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in for a second there. I mean, the first and foremost, I mean, the parents, they're all in it because they want the best for their kid, which is fantastic. So again, a lot of it's just, I think some of this was discussed in previous panels, is really setting that expectation up front. It's, letting the team know as well as the parents, if you're having, coaches meetings, parents meetings, setting that expectation, hopefully before the first practice on what the goals are for the organization, what we're going to try to have have your child go through in order to, develop physically, socially, mentally throughout a 3-month season, whatever it may be. And hopefully from there, that's going to alleviate some of the issues that, some of the parents might have, because all that's going to be worked out up front instead of in the middle of a season when things might come up here and there.
Kelly?
I
know. I wish you could get a little more fired up.
I think we need to let all levels, everyone, understand that sport today is really safer than it has ever been. 21 years ago, I made a comment and called this the youth sports industry, and I took a hit. It was an industry? Like, really? Well, now the latest stat that I have is that it's a $53 billion industry. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I think free play is awesome, but I have terrible concerns about those who are pushing against organized youth sports. Organized is, to me, is so important. That is where the training is coming. That is where there are protocols and best practices and rules and regulations, and that's exactly what some people don't want. And I don't think that there's one or the other. I think we need to have a good balance of both.
Andy, the role of the sports administrator, how has it evolved or changed in your perspective,
Well,
your experience?
So I'm a director of education for Minnesota Youth Soccer. So I see myself as a coach, even though 95% of what I do is probably considered to be administrative. So I kind of come at that, I guess, the question maybe a little differently than Sally or Mike would in their roles with their organizations. But just that if it's how has it changed?
Yeah, personally, how has your role evolved over time?
I guess I'd say mine, I've tried to have it not change all that much in terms of where my real value and connection is between myself as an educator and coaches, parents, or the athletes that we're trying to develop. I know we're not trying to develop parents, but certainly whatever it is that we're trying to communicate through all different kinds of vehicles, courses, clinics, initiatives, that it's still about trying to make connections. So part that's changed maybe is how we do that. Now it's more through, do I have to make a 2-minute video tutorial because we could have thousands of people in this room, but we're not going to get everybody at the same time in the same place. So how do we distribute those messages? How do we communicate? I'm not a marketing expert, but I've tried to learn enough to know that we got to tell them 7 different times in 7 different ways, because just one email blast or one in-person meeting doesn't spread the message enough, or the message gets lost. It's just a one-shot deal. So it's how many different vehicles we have to use to try to communicate. And then the follow-up as well, because kids are maybe if they're dropping out quicker, we're also sometimes losing those coaches if they're in it to coach their own kids. So it's retraining and sending the same message that you sent last year again. So I guess it's just become maybe more intensive in terms of how to keep delivering the message.
And that's an interesting thing. I'm coming back to you on that, Sally, because the message, and it is something that you've got. The stands are always changing. The kids are changing. The parents are changing,
Right.
and you're encountering these new people and doing that. And then you've already mentioned the media. So how do you manage your message? How do you do that? And how much time is that taking from your other responsibilities?
Yes, thank you. For me, with the National Council of Youth Sports, we work primarily with the presidents, CEOs, executive directors of the national organizations. So the messaging that we put out to them, we know they're busy people, and what we are putting out to them has to be clear, concise, bullet points, 2 or 3, no more. And we try to put out messaging that is very easy for them to just turn around and shake out to their colleagues. So it is ever changing, and when you're working with different levels, we at least try and put out the template so that they can customize it to their particular organization and their needs.
Can I follow up?
Please.
For one more thought on
Yeah,
that.
please.
It's just part of the fun, maybe, if that's not too strong a word, of being an administrative role, is trying to find clever, creative ways to get those messages to the grassroots, to the coaches. So just one idea would be, like for a concussion piece, whether it's a few bullet points or maybe it's just when in doubt, sit them out as a reminder, front of mind, is a lot of sports would have an equipment bag. So is it a bag tag with your organization's logo on one side, and it's just that reminder on the back of the bag tag for that coach, for the assistants, for the manager, players themselves, anybody who's going to see that? How do we get the message not just through a classroom or a formal online education or a meeting, but how do we put it on the ground, the back of a clipboard? What are coaches going to use, and how do we get those messages right in front of their face more often?
Sure.
Yeah, just along the same lines that have been talked about, just the ever-changing kind of landscape in youth sports for an administrator. I mean, that's one of the roles at USA Football for the football side, is teaching those best practices, because they literally change sometimes every few months, definitely every year. And as administrators, we're tasked with compiling that information, getting it to communities, and then those communities as administrators, they have to be the ones that sometimes dissect that and actually transfer that down to the individual coach level. So again, it's something that's probably more prevalent now than it's ever been, just because it's changing so frequently. Again, everything, of course, that was talked about with concussions, but again, a number of other issues, just how much contact time you can have at practices for football, for an example. I mean, all of that stuff, that's going through a rapid change as science continues to have new studies and updates on that end. And then, again, as administrators, we have to really focus on reading all of that material, finding out what is going to put the kids in the best position possible to have a better and safer experience.
Staying with you, Mike, USA Football and based out of Illinois, and something grabbed a lot of headlines just in the past week. Illinois has proposed a state law of no tackle football until a certain age. So what does that do, potentially, or how does that even if it never happens, just from a perception standpoint, how do you answer something like that?
Yeah, definitely. And as Tim mentioned, I'm actually from the Chicagoland area, so this one hit right at home last week. The Dave Duerson Act was proposed, which would basically eliminate youth tackle football under the age of 12 years old. Some other states have tried this in the past, and what it definitely does initially is continues the narrative on the football side that youth tackle football is something that shouldn't be played. Again, at USA Football, we're in the stance right now still of trying, we believe that, at the youth tackle football ages, the best that we can do right now is to continue to teach those best practices, making sure that coaches are up to date on, the latest on exactly, teaching different skills, techniques, again, how much time on the practice field, and then that would transfer down to the coaches and to the players. One thing that it's opened up quite a bit, and we were talking about right before this, is, finding different points of entry for individuals and for children that want to play football. Again, it's no shock that youth tackle football numbers are down over the last handful of years. And actually, this past year was the first year that youth flag football had more kids come out than tackle football. And where we're at currently in the football landscape is, most leagues up to a couple years ago, it was either they were playing flag football or they were playing full 11-on-11 tackle football. So trying to figure out, is there a gap in between that, some kind of modified game that maybe can make just make the game more of a developmental aspect for kids. They can come out, learn different positions, have more fun playing. So those are some of the things that USA Football is doing, again, piloting some of these programs, trying to figure out, again, some of it, of course, with the lawsuit coming out is, in the future, we might have to have these different kinds of games in order to have kids still have a chance to go out and play football. So let's try to get ahead of that and, again, find what does work best and what other options might be there within the sport.
But then letting the media know that the rules in football in youth football have changed, that, the tackling and in practice is that's out. We need to get that message out, because otherwise, the parents they're scared. They don't want to put these kids in the high contact sports. And, when you talked about numbers being down, true in some cases, but USA Ultimate, have you even heard of it? It is like the fastest growing sport right now. Disc golf. There's sports that are really picking up at the same time. So, there's a lot that we need to do a better job on getting the message out on what all the positive benefits are of sport and the rules and regulations that are shifting and changing constantly.
Right, and there are only so many hours in a day, and I would imagine that you all got into this because you had a love or a passion for sports, and that's what your vision probably where you wanted to keep your focus. And I'm thinking about specifically, Dave Durson was a member of the Chicago Bears championship team in '85, is a player who was diagnosed to have had CTE and did take his own life. And that's where this whole discussion of concussions has really dominated the headlines. And that gets into insurance. And now you guys have administrations and leagues, and that's a component. And now insurance is something that they're looking at the issue of concussions, and now that's impacting you. And instead of your focus being on the field, I would imagine it's in other areas.
Yes, I'm going to definitely jump in on here.
Please.
So in 2002, I received a telephone call from the president of Little League Baseball. And he said, "Are you hearing from the insurance companies that they're starting to drop child abuse and molestation from our policies unless we start doing our due diligence?" I said, "I have not, but let's put some feelers out and find out." We, long story short, we held a series of summits and did some studies and found out that yes, this was a real issue. Real long story short, we ended up being founders of the National Center for Safety Initiatives, NCSI, for criminal background screening. And they totally just focus on youth sports and youth serving organizations. The point to make here is the power that the insurance industry has. They definitely played a large role in shifting the culture of youth sports, whereby now nearly every national organization mandates quality criminal background screening. Concussions, same thing. You've got to have your protocols in place. The insurance companies they're looking at loss ratio. That is their money in, money out. We've held a summit in July, and it was actually called Shift the Culture, Influencing Change in Youth Sports. And the attendees were primarily national youth sports organizations and the insurance underwriters and brokers to talk about what are the issues, what are you seeing, insurance world, on upcoming trends and problems in sport. We're concerned about hydration, and heat stroke, and the deaths and the claims are becoming more and more increased. So we have a lot of work to do in an awful lot of areas, but the insurance definitely it's important that we work hard with them and we all communicate with one another to make sport better, but they definitely can affect trends and shift in culture and sport. I think good comment too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, with the insurance, again, you know, with USA Football, we work with, you know, the 10,000 plus youth football organizations around the country, and it's, you know, what Sally's saying is exactly right, and one of our responsibilities is to then, once we have those communications with insurance companies, you know, the major players out there, is communicating that down. And you'd probably all be blown away if, we'd bring in 10 different youth football leagues in here, and there might be 10 different insurance policies that cover all sorts of, different levels, to different degrees. Some of them, very minuscule spectator-only policies, as to other ones that are covering, everything that a league might be doing. So it's one of those that, as far as our roles, is really the education piece to pass on to those, to the youth sports leagues in general, with making sure they are properly covered. Because if they're not, it just takes one unfortunate accident to occur, and next thing you know, a lot of people are in a lot of trouble without that proper coverage.
Waivers aren't enough.
You want to add anything, Andy?
Yeah, I just say kind of the spill-on effect of that is then where the rubber meets the road when we're training coaches or setting standards for coaches, is then some of that insurance piece comes down to, well, you've got to have, in Minnesota, it's a law, so that makes it easier to have some weight to it, but you've got to have your concussion certification. In an organization that I work with on the side, it's an all-volunteer organization, community-based recreational sport organization. It's annual background check. So when we've got volunteer parent coaches, 200 of them working with 1,000 kids, we've done your concussion certification, you've done your background check, you got to come to a meeting that's going to be an hour long about policies and heat, illness, kind of all those procedures, communication things, how do games get canceled and all that thing. So by the time we're done with, they've spent 2 hours as volunteers just kind of now being okay to coach. The one thing I haven't talked to them about yet is actually how to coach, right? So we haven't even gotten to that point yet of here's how you can really impact on the field when those 12 kids are with you. Here's what you can do to give them a good experience. We have to spend more time on the do no harm part before we can really even get to the fun part. Is why everyone's there in the first place, is because we have an interest in working with kids or coaching the sport.
We're getting to the point where I do want to open this up to if anybody has any questions, but just one more question as you go through, and maybe more of an opportunity than a question. So, Sally answered things extensively, in these questions, and your passion is obvious, in this. And one of the things you said was, we're probably not going to solve, anything today, but I want to share best practices or encourage the sharing of best practices. In that vein, Andy, is there anything you'd like to just throw out there to administrators in general as far as best practices, or something that's worked for you or that's helped you maintain your love or perhaps even your sanity in your position?
For most things, it comes down to me in communicating a message is to start with the why, right? Some of you may have seen this Simon Sinek TED Talk. Start with why, and then you tell them the what and the how after. So I think whether it's a mandate, whether it's a state law, whether it's a best practice that we're trying to get coaches, parents, athletes to comply with, I think sometimes we just give them the what you have to do and how you do it without maybe spending enough time on the why, because coaches in particular tend to be competitive. They tend to have an ego. They tend not to appreciate mandates and being told what to do. So we've really got to probably spend more time and effort explaining the why, so that they've bought in more than just being told, you have to do this to comply with whatever governing body they may or may not even be aware of is requiring them to do something. It gets kind of far removed from their world. So that would be mine.
Sally?
We have to reach the parents. We can have all these rules and regulations. The education of the coaches is super important, but the education has to be user-friendly, affordable, comprehensive and complete, but not so over the top that you have to have a PhD in order to participate in the educational program, or the everyday parent/coach volunteer isn't going to participate. Reaching the parents is a real challenge. I really do want to thank Ty and Players Health team for having this summit. It's important for all of us to communicate and share. I would love to see this with a room full of parents and really be able to reach into the grassroots with all of this information. There's so many smart people in this room, and there's so much that is said that we're learning from, and there's a lot that we've heard before, but we've got to reach into the grassroots. We've got to hit the parents.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback on what both of them said, but mainly with Andy with the why aspect, and I think that leads into the parents. USA football, I mean, we strongly believe that no coach should ever step on the field before they're certified. Again, they should have that baseline of knowledge before going out and meeting with kids. Trusted Coach is one of the partners here. We work with them, especially in a lot of this area, in the Twin Cities, and coaches kind of work with both of us, and all that education is great for the coaches, but as Andy said, selling the organizations on why that's important, getting the coaches to understand that why aspect, that's what's hopefully going to lead to those coaches then, relaying that information down to the parents. It's just, we've been involved with a handful of parents clinics. The Vikings do parents clinics a couple times every year right here in everybody's backyard, and it might be 50 or 100 people at it. How many parents are playing, have kids playing sports in this area? I mean, we're talking millions. So right. I mean, it's one of those that all of these events we'd love to do. It's just some of those resources aren't in place. So getting those organizations and coaches to understand the why aspect is what will really, I think, hopefully help drive that information down to the parents. Because quite honestly, a lot of them right now might not care what we're talking about or what we communicate with an administrator. If we can really get them to understand, why it is that important, that should help out.
And buy in. And buy in.
Exactly.
Listen, we're up against the time that the sports medicine panel is going to come up next. So if you have any questions for these people, if you guys maybe kind of step off to the side and take them that way. But Andy Coots, Sally Johnson, Mike Cazzoni, thank you so much for your time here today and your information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, how you guys doing? So we're about to hop into our next panel, which is our sports medicine panel. It'll be moderated by Francis Shin, the Associate Professor for the Law of University of Minnesota. He directs the Shin Neuro Law Lab and leads the Grand Challenges Grant on youth sports concussions. Dr. Stewart, Professor of Orthopedic Surgery and Chair of the Division of Sports Medicine at Mayo Clinic. Dr. Lukowski, Co-Director of the Mayo Clinic Sports Medicine and the Professor of the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. Amy Custard, she is a clinical neuropsychologist and now is announced as the Clinical Director for TRIA Sports Medicine. And then Amy Hamilton, she is the Manager of TRIA Sports Medicine Program as well as TRIA Concussion Program. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you, Tyree, for the introduction. Thanks to all of you for being here and Players Health for having this. My name is Francis Shen. I'm a law professor, but I study the intersection of neuroscience and law. And I'm just here to moderate, but I want to say a few words of context, both data and law. And actually this morning there's an op-ed by me in the Tribune, and I'll repeat just a minute of that. First on the data side, and to pick up from what was just said, there are a lot of risks, and we'll talk about some of those. There are a lot of benefits that come with many sports, including football. And we have some data that show that, in fact, there's overestimation of the risk, maybe by a scale of 5. Same way people overestimate sometimes how much crime there is because they see a few headlines. The actual data on incidents and the public perception, there may be a difference there, though, again, lots of risks we'll talk about. Second thing that I wanted to say just a couple words on is the legal context. There are a lot of reasons we do things. And in sports, sometimes we do things because it's the right thing or we want to. Sometimes we do so because the law says we have to. And all 50 states, including Minnesota, have passed a youth sports concussion law. Our state's law looks like most of the rest, and there's a before, during, and after. The before part says that you got to give athletes and parents, coaches, information about concussions and some regulations about what that info looks like. Also, before, you have to train, and we just heard about that, your coaches and your officials so that they're certified. That's the before. The during is that if you are a coach or official and you see symptoms of sign or suspect a concussion of an athlete, you need to remove them from play. And then there's the after that suspicion that if indeed they are removed for concussion, you need to go through a protocol. Here in Minnesota, it requires seeing a certain expert and then getting in writing permission to return. Now, here's the thing that I want to quiz you on. I'm a professor, so I have to ask this question. I will tell you that most of the public gets it wrong, but we'll see if you can get it right. The description that I just described, that before, during, and after, here are your three choices. Is that required of all schools and all youth organizations? Is that required for schools but recommended for youth organizations? Or is that recommended for schools and just recommended for youth organizations? Now, I don't have a way to check what your answer is, but you can decide what you think the answer is. Most people think the answer is the middle, that it's required for schools, but if you're a youth organization, you don't have to do all that. And it varies state to state, but here in Minnesota, the answer is A. If you are a municipality, an organization, you run an athletic activity and you charge a fee for it, it's kind of the way our law is phrased, you're required to do those things. Now, the challenge of the law is that you received no resources to do it, and it specifically said at the end, you don't have to worry so much about liability because it says no new legal cause of action is created. That is, if you don't do it, you don't do it, and no one can sue you for not doing it, though it does raise questions about the reasonable standard of care. But I just want to make that point that when you go back, if you're an administrator in your league, not only should you say maybe we ought to do it, the law requires you to do it, even if there's not an enforcement mechanism. So that's the law. And that leaves, I think, a transition into where we go next, which is what should you be doing before, during, and after? What are the best practices? And we have with us four of really the nation's best, and certainly here in our state, just leading experts from a variety of perspectives. You'll hear that, and I think one of the themes you'll hear is how in different professions they work together to try and come to diagnoses and consensus. We'll start with Dr. Laskowski, who will talk about injury prevention generally. Concussion is one, but not the only and not the most common injury in sports, and we'll then move into some concussion-specific issues. But Mel, hand the floor over to you.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, you're absolutely right. About 85% of sports injuries are musculoskeletal injuries. They're injuries to the joints and muscles and tissues. So those are what we handle the most. And just tagging off of what we heard earlier, you know, a couple things. We want to keep kids active. We want to keep kids out there. We have an epidemic in this country. I've served on 2 president's councils on physical fitness. 70% of our kids overweight, obese, sedentary lifestyle. So we want to get kids moving. We want to keep them out there. Just a couple of resources, again, building on earlier discussions. Project Play, if you just search Project Play, this is a group by the American College of Sports Medicine, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Clinton Foundation. The whole goal of that is to get kids moving, get kids back into free play, get kids active. A lot of coaching character is built into this program. It's just a wonderful program, and it's taking off. Some of those figures that you heard earlier, that's where the survey came from, where 43%, number 43 was winning. Number 1 and 2 was having fun and being with friends, is what kids want to do out of activity and sports. So that's a great resource. And then the Inside Out initiative is something that I just heard, actually, that is incorporated into some of the Minnesota State High School League, but it's a wonderful group. If you just search Inside Out initiative, they're about character building. So we want to keep kids out there. We want to keep them. We can't prevent all sports injuries. What we try and say, Dr. Stewart and I, we do sports medicine, so we deal with these injuries. What we try and do is protect somebody as much as possible. And what we found out is the way you move in many ways determines your risk of injury. So if you come into Mayo Clinic Sports Medicine in downtown Minneapolis, across from Target Center, you'll find a huge turf area. We have a 40-yard turf area, but we also have cages that come down, and we have a ton of cameras. So we use a lot of video. So we have a 60-foot, 6-inch cage if you're an overhead thrower that you can throw in. We have a golf swing cage. We have a runner's treadmill that's videoed. In Rochester, we actually have artificial ice and a skating treadmill. All these are monitored by cameras, and our therapists and performance coaches work with the individual who is being tested, and we look at video analysis. Because we found that the way you move is very important. You know, you may have heard the phrase, practice makes perfect. Is that true? It's perfect practice that makes perfect, right? So if I'm a tennis player and I swing badly in a backhand, right, and I lead with my elbow and I slap the ball like this, I'm going to overload this tendon here that goes on the outside of my elbow. It's called lateral epicondylitis or tennis elbow. So I can do all the therapy I want in here. Dr. Stewart can do all the surgery he wants in here. If that person goes back to slapping at a ball like that, they're going to have the problem over and over and over again. So we really have to find out what is the movement problem that led to that issue. We're finding ACL injuries are epidemic, as you guys know, especially in females. And one of our researchers, Dr. Tim Hewitt, along with some others, have found certain movement patterns that are risk factors for ACL. Very simple test we can do. Actually, a single leg stand. If you do a single leg squat, the knee should go right over the foot on the way down. What we have found is this position we call dynamic medial knee valgus, where if we ask somebody to do a single leg squat, their knee caves in. Or if they land from a jump and they cave in, that's bad. And we found it's a predisposing factor to ACL injuries and a whole mess of other problems too. If you're a runner and you get ITB syndrome on the outside of the knee, chances are you have that movement pattern. If you have hip bursitis, chances are you have that movement pattern. If you have sportsman's hernia even, chances are you have that movement pattern. So those are things that we, in our pre-part exams, we actually screen for those. And if somebody exhibits in a single leg squat that inward movement of the knee, we'll actually send a letter home saying, hey, good idea, this has been associated with injury, good idea if you come back and correct that. And we have a corrective program of exercise that we can do for that. Same thing with the throwers. You can imagine an overhead thrower. There's something called opening up too early, which you guys probably know about. If you face the plate too early, you throw all that energy back into the ground that you generated with your legs and core. And all of a sudden now this shoulder has to generate 90 miles an hour and 100 miles an hour. No matter how young, no matter how strong you are, that's going to fail over time. So the movement pattern of a perfect baseball throw, you look at the greats, Nolan Ryan, 46 years old, pitching 95-mile-an-hour fastballs. He is a clinic on how to pitch. Guy's got glutes, huge glutes. He transferred his force from his legs to his core. This was just a passenger along for the ride. It was not a prime mover. When it becomes a prime mover, it breaks down over time. So those are things we try and tease out. And there are movement patterns like for the knee, we've identified that inward movement of the knee. There are mechanics factors in just about every sport movement that you do that we can, when we video, we see how you're doing it. And maybe there's some specific restriction. Maybe you have a tight hip muscle and you're a golfer. And it's preventing you from kind of doing the necessary rotations. So all of a sudden you're getting back pain and shoulder pain. Well, again, we can address this shoulder all we want. If we don't fix that hip issue, we're not going to fix the problem. So the way you move is very important, and we analyze it. We try and give corrective steps to correct the bad movement patterns and get you in the most optimal movement pattern for your sport or activity.
Great, thank you. We'll move next to Amy Hamilton, you've heard introduced. I'll add also past president of the Minnesota Athletic Trainers Association, so it's got an institutional and organizational perspective as well, and will talk to us about concussion from the sideline and then treatment afterwards.
All right, so I'm going to bring the athletic trainer's perspective. So my first question is, do you have an athletic trainer? And you're going to say, oh, she's biased, she is an athletic trainer, and that might be a little bit true, but hear me out. So I'm going to tell you the why. So first of all, we just heard a lot about prevention, and an athletic trainer, one of the pillars of our education is certainly prevention. And all of the movement screening that you just talked about, that is a role that we very frequently play and are experts in, so we can certainly add to that. I think when you're looking at any institutional changes, rule changes, equipment changes, those types of things, to have an athletic trainer as part of the team that's looking at those things is really important. We bring a unique perspective, that front of the sideline type of perspective to that. Another element is, do you have an emergency action plan? We've heard a little bit about this, but that's critical. And this is something that should be written, it should be rehearsed ahead of time. A good emergency action plan and well-trained people will save lives. So that's critical. The other thing we've heard a lot about is, do you have a concussion protocol in place? So as I transition more into talking on the concussion side of things, do you have a concussion protocol in place for your organization? Another element that certainly wouldn't be only the athletic trainers, but we can certainly lend a huge hand in, would be that of education. We just heard Francis talk about education and how the law mandates that you have education. And we all believe or want to believe that certainly the coaches are adhering to their mandate to do their online CDC training every 3 years. We hope that that's certainly the case. In my experience with youth sport, I'm not seeing very many instances where that's being enforced with the athletes and the parents themselves. At the NCAA level, at professional sports, that's a requirement. Those student athletes or the professional athletes, they're getting that education now as a mandate annually. We're not seeing that trickle down and really being mandated. And that's a critical element, is understanding a concussion, recognizing a concussion, and knowing that they have it, that they need to report those symptoms, and that they really have an obligation to report those symptoms. So when you think about from the sideline perspective, we know that the law states that if anyone exhibits signs or symptoms of concussion, they should be removed from play and evaluated by a medical professional trained in the management of concussion. Well, wouldn't it be great if that professional was right there on your sideline? So if you think about it from a perspective of, as an athletic trainer, if I see the injury occur, I'm there right away when it happens. I do an early evaluation on that injury itself. I know the early signs and symptoms. I'm witnessing them, I'm experiencing them. That plays into what's our treatment plan for this particular person. The other big thing about that early evaluation and giving good advice is giving good advice. So we all know that, and it is still the gold standard, that relative physical and cognitive rest is best early on. But what does relative mean? Some kids may not be able to go to school after a concussion, but for some kids, it might be okay. They might do just fine. Some kids maybe need to eliminate all screen time. Other kids might do okay to have a little bit of screen time or to be able to do a little bit of reading. And to understand early signs and symptoms and to have good instruction on what this person might be able to try to do and what that recovery looks like can be very helpful in their overall recovery, and certainly as we are potentially passing them on to other providers, to give that early history and to know that they have maybe taken some good early steps, appropriate amounts of rest, maybe not too much rest in some cases. So beyond that, there's the element of follow-up care. So if you look at this from a standpoint of a member of the sports medicine team, to have somebody who is there on a regular, if not daily basis, who can follow up with that athlete or that student athlete, connecting the dots between the other medical providers and specialists who are part of that care team, the physicians, the neuropsychologists, the physical therapists, also connecting dots with parents and coaches and school nurses and guidance counselors, making sure that the return to learn and the return to play process is simultaneous and seamless. That can be a critical element. And then certainly last but not least would be the return to play, monitoring that return to play. I don't know how many of you experience this, but I've certainly seen a lot of examples where you'll have Johnny come back and he has his note from his physician that says Johnny's cleared to play. But if Johnny hasn't done any form of a stepwise return, that means Johnny's returned to start a stepwise. And coaches don't like to hear that, right? And so there's that element of having that supervised stepwise return to play. And someone who's there on site who not only can supervise that, know that it's happening, know that the steps are taking, but also make sure that the levels of exertion that should be met at each step to know that they're really truly ready to go on to the next step. That's a critical piece as well with regard to recovery and knowing that we're sending someone back safely. And I'm probably out of time, but I'm going to make one more plug.
Sure, you're good.
The other element is a financial one. So if you think about cost to families, one of the biggest things, you can mitigate cost to families by having medical providers on your sidelines. You can eliminate some needless ED visits, some needless urgent care visits. You have the follow-up care or a piece of the follow-up care that may be included there when you've got that person associated with your team. And certainly there's an element often of being able to get somebody to the right provider in a timely manner. If you start with the emergency room, if you start with urgent care, you might then get referred to your primary care provider. But if what you need is a surgeon or a neuropsychologist who's a specialist in concussion, we could help you get to that specialist immediately, saving some needless visits and saving money along the way.
Thanks, Amy. That's fantastic. We'll turn now to Dr. Michael Stewart, who in addition to his roles at Mayo that were announced, is the Chief Medical Officer for USA Hockey and has also served an important role on the Minnesota State High School League Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. So it's really, and of course, as again, many of you know, a parent of a high-achieving athlete. So multiple perspectives, a lot of knowledge, and we'll turn it over to you. I know the constraint of a small amount of minutes, but tell us what we need to know.
Thanks, Francis, and thanks to Players Health. I'll try to be brief. So I appreciate everybody's attention. I want to talk first about injury epidemiology research. We need to understand what types of injuries occur in what sports, to which athletes, how they happen, how severe they are, how we can prevent them, and how we can treat them. But it's a real challenge, especially in youth sports. We don't have a national injury registry. We don't have national health insurance like Sweden. So every athlete has an electronic medical record entry that we can access. So we have to do cohort research and continue to strive to have this type of national injury registry. When we have valuable data, we can help prevent, diagnose, and treat sports injuries better. An example, we did a 3-year study, prospective analysis, on junior A hockey in the United States Hockey League, and proved that you are 25 times more likely to be injured in a game compared to practice. So when parents ask me, how can we reduce the risk of injury in sport? I tell them, never play a game. But they're not real happy about that, so we have to come up with other strategies. But I think sports epidemiology is very important. And we talk about concussion, and the role of athletic trainers is huge, as Amy said, but it's a multifactorial approach. So everybody has the holy grail, a helmet, a mouthpiece, a rule change, but it's much more than that. It's multifactorial. It starts with education, parents, coaches, officials, athletes, healthcare providers. It also involves things like equipment, but maybe more important is movement and body control and contact skills that Dr. Laskowski talked about. Teaching athletes how to block, tackle, body check, making sure that it's the appropriate age. That's why we look at rule changes. USA Hockey made a rule change to disallow body checking in games until age 13. Research out of Calgary has shown a 67% reduction in the risk of concussion to Pee Wee hockey players in Canada since they made that same rule change 2 years after we did. Enforcing the existing rules. We know from NHL data and from some of our own research, dangerous activities increase the risk of catastrophic and non-catastrophic injuries. In 1975, they outlawed spearing in football, saw a dramatic decrease in cervical spine injury and quadriplegia. Same thing in hockey. We understand that charging, boarding, checking from behind, and hits to the head are dangerous. One way to try to decrease that type of activity is to enforce the existing rules. Another way to do it, which is near and dear to my heart, but a tremendous challenge to all of us, is teaching sportsmanship and mutual respect. It was brought up here today. It starts at home by parents. It's not about professionalism and super specialization at the age of 8. It's about having fun, playing the game with integrity, having respect for your opponent. So we like to think that a good coach sees a player doing something potentially dangerous, and regardless if a penalty is called, take that player off the ice, off the field, off the court, and play that role of a teacher and explain about these dangerous activities. And I'll close with saying that even though there's inherent risk, like Dr. Laskowski said, in sport, there is tremendous risk in being a child, a youth, and an adolescent. Because if you're not playing sports, you're going to be climbing trees, going down the rails on a skateboard or a bicycle. You're going to be doing things that are dangerous. And the most severe traumatic brain injuries we see are from things with wheels, bicycles, skateboards, motorcycles, four-wheelers, and when you defy gravity, playground equipment, trampolines, etc. So keep in mind that team sports have tremendous benefits, which have already been talked about today. First and foremost, they're fun. Secondly, there's tremendous physical benefits for energy systems, movement patterns, bones, muscles. It keeps kids active, and they're more likely to exercise as adults if they played sports as kids. There's tremendous psychological benefits, self-esteem, learning how to win, learning how to lose. making friends of your teammates, lifelong friends, which we all probably have as we look back on our sports participation. And of course, then the benefits of decreasing risk of diseases like obesity, diabetes, sleep apnea, possibly even cancer. So we have to keep in mind that our objective is not to get rid of sports, but it's to make sports safer.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. We'll turn now to Dr. Amy Custer. You've heard before, will be announced as the new clinical director of TRIA Sports Concussion Program, a clinical neuropsychologist. Tell us about the ways that you, multifaceted ways that you evaluate and treat concussion.
Yeah, so I'm going to come more from the clinical aspect of this, but just piggybacking off of what you said, Dr. Stewart, it really is, our goal is to make the game safer, right? And that's what we do really clinically too, of how we are assessing this injury now and how we are managing this and making sure in all different dimensions that the athlete is ready, is safe, and is able to go back to their sport. So there's been a lot of advances in how we look at this injury. It's not just a symptom scale, it's not just computerized neurocognitive testing, but it's really understanding who this athlete is before the injury occurs. And so research has really developed in the last 5-10 years, finding different risk factors for cases that would require active treatment or that might go down a protracted recovery. Younger athletes, female athletes, they are at risk for prolonged recovery. Individuals with migraines are set up for different types of concussions or symptom profiles per se. We also see that ocular motor problems, difficulties with using your eyes together, a family history or even a personal history of lazy eye, some of the binocular dysfunction that we see with ADHD or learning disability, that sets that athlete up for a very certain type of concussion that requires active treatment. One of the newer ones that's come out is car sickness. Having a history of car sickness prior to a head injury actually sets you up for a very specific type of dizziness or vestibular problem after this injury. And I think one of the most important things that have come out that not only do parents and coaches need to recognize this, but athletes need to recognize this next risk factor. And that risk factor is actually playing through symptoms. So an athlete that plays through symptoms is 9 times more likely to take 4 to 6 weeks to recover rather than the typical 10 to 14 days. That's a big deal. And these are typically the injuries that are less dramatic, that are subtle symptoms perhaps. They're not passing out on the field. You might not see them stumble on the field. So it's really on that athlete to stand up and say, yeah, I don't think I'm right. And Dr. Heather Bergerson talked about this a little bit in the beginning panel of how the pendulum has swung, and there's been, from just getting your bell rung to now, it did swing, I think, a little too far. It's starting to balance. In the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of my athletes be more anxious about head injuries and maybe over reporting symptoms, speaking up a little bit more. And I think in the last 6 months, I've actually seen it go a little bit the other way. I think athletes are fearful of speaking up. Maybe they don't want to admit that they have an injury they don't want to be held out of, and so they have a tendency to want to play through. We got to make sure that doesn't happen. But when we assess these injuries clinically and really are trying to determine how to best treat this very individualized injury, we need to know who they were before. We need to know what the immediate signs and symptoms were, the severity of the injury. But then we use a lot of different clinical tools on assessing this. And again, it's not just symptom scales, it's not computerized neurocognitive testing, although that is good, and those are very important pieces, but it's much more of a multidisciplinary approach. And it's looking at visual systems, it's looking at ocular motor movements, it's looking at balance, vestibular, and by vestibular I mean the athlete's ability to stabilize their vision, to interpret movement and motion, to integrate visual stimulus, all things that athletes need to do very well to be an athlete. But it's looking at that. It's also assessing cervicogenic involvement as possible contributors to dizziness or difficulties concentrating. We see symptoms come from a lot of different areas. Psychological aspects of this too. Anxiety can create a ton of symptoms that are very similar to concussion. So really making sure that we are assessing this fully and coming up with where the aberrant signal is coming from. If we can figure out what type of concussion or where's the aberrant signal, then we know our best point of intervention. And we've come up with a lot. There's still a lot of development going on, but there's active treatment approaches now. Gone are the days of dark rooms and rest. We're activating individuals safely, our athletes within sometimes 72 hours of the injury now. And we're seeing better outcomes. We're gradually getting them back into school. We're having them on routine schedules instead of saying sleep all day. But we have active approaches of exertion therapy, vestibular therapy, vision therapy, ocular motor retraining, sports psychology. So it really is a team approach to making sure that this athlete is ready to go back to, if it be school or to get back on the field. It's not just simply being asymptomatic. And I think that, too, is an important piece where we can make this sport safer, making sure that athlete's ready to be on the field or the ice.
Thanks. I think we'll open up by picking up on a point you just raised, and that's the challenge of getting athletes on board and creating a culture of reporting. Culture is a word we've heard a lot today. I'm wondering if you could, if you want to jump in, any of you comment on how do you get buy-in from athletes? So things that we see are athletes who, for not because they're liars, but because they want to play the next day or they want to play in the rest of the tournament, will come to you and you say, how do you feel? I feel fine, even though they don't feel fine. Or will, if they're taking a baseline test, deliberately try to score poorly. How do you address those issues and get athletes on board with you so that they're honest with you and open? What are strategies that you use?
Well, I think it starts with education. So we've learned even at the professional ranks that athletes now are respecting their brain more. They understand the potential consequences of what was mentioned here this morning, and that is returning to play too soon or denying symptoms. And I think the second part of that is coming up with objective diagnostic tests. And so it's very important to realize that concussion symptoms evolve over time. So yes, some athletes will deny the problem. Other athletes simply don't have symptoms until the next day. And I'll never forget removing a hockey player from a state tournament game, evaluating with every tool we had. He was completely normal, no symptoms, let him play, scored a goal, took him out just because we were still worried, examined him after the game, still asymptomatic, passed every test. I got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from his mother that she found him lying on the kitchen floor, screaming in pain, holding his head. I told her to call 911. I thought he had an intracranial bleed that we missed. Went to the emergency department, skull x-rays, CT, MRI, everything normal. By Sunday afternoon, his symptoms were gone. So we can't always diagnose a concussion at the point of care. And we can never predict severity or the duration of symptoms or time to return to play. So tongue-in-cheek, when a parent asks me, when can my son or daughter return to play after concussion? And I tell them sometime between a week and never. Because I honestly don't know. I've seen athletes symptomatic for years, permanently. So I think an objective diagnostic test, which doesn't rely on symptom reporting and doesn't necessarily rely on observing signs or neurologic problems, would be helpful. And whether that's a rapid number naming test like the King-Devick test, whether it's a fluid biomarker like testing somebody's saliva or a drop of blood for biomarkers, there's got to be a way, and that's why we have some real exciting research in these areas which will help the healthcare providers do a better job of taking care of our athletes.
And I think we use our athletic trainers a ton for the education part of it, because that's so. We just had a study published where we asked, people, you wonder, you tell people something, but you wonder what they're really hearing. So we wanted to know, because we have a bunch of trainers out in our areas, high schools. We cover about 18 area high schools. And we do provide a lot of concussion education, but you wonder how much is getting through. And in this survey, one of the things that came across is only a third of people responded that a concussion was indeed a brain injury. I don't know what they thought it was, or whether they thought because there were no MRI changes, although we're getting sensitive there more now, but no x-ray changes, that it wasn't a brain injury. But I think if the culture of the team and the culture of the coach and the training staff, I think that if there's a culture of comfortableness with, hey, this is a serious business. We want to take care of you guys. We want to protect you guys. Don't be afraid of, and really our goal is to get the person back safely as quick as possible. So if they know everybody's working for that goal, if they know the severity of what could happen, if we use our staff for the educational purposes, I think that culture is key to create comfortableness.
I agree with that completely. It's that culture. And I certainly think from an athletic trainer's perspective, we are seeing that shift, but there certainly still exists what I call a little bit of an old school mentality, and the coaches that'll say, don't go see the trainer, they're just gonna hold you out. Yeah. The hide everything from your medical providers because they think we're the bad guy. I was once introduced at a team banquet as the person whose job it was to give coach bad news. And, so that's a challenging thing to overcome, but certainly to recognize that we're not the bad guy. We have a job to do, but we want to win just as much as you do. I mean, I have the same national championship rings as the coaches and the players from my days at the U. So, I mean, we want to win too. And our goal is really to get them back as quickly as possible, but we need to do that safely.
Mm-hmm. Great. We may have time for an audience question if there is one. Otherwise, I've got a bunch, but I want to make sure. So I'll take the moderator's prerogative to ask maybe what will probably be our last question then, if there are none from the field. And it has to do with something we heard before, again, a theme for the day, asking questions and trying to get expertise. A real challenge is when someone doesn't have an athletic trainer on the sidelines or doesn't have, Mayo next door, they may not know what questions to ask or where to go, and they just hit Google because their kid. What sorts of questions should parents and youth organizations and coaches be asking of their medical team, various medical professionals, to know if, in fact, this person knows anything about concussions? Or what do you look for? How do you find?
Well, I think I would recommend the concussion recognition tool. So you may be familiar with the consensus conferences on concussion in sport. The most recent one was actually last fall in Berlin, Germany. And they came up with a tool which is not for medical providers, because we all realize, even though we'd love to have an athletic trainer at every event, it's not going to happen Graham Arena 4, Saturday morning at 9 o'clock in a Pee Wee hockey game in Rochester, Minnesota, when there's 5 games going on simultaneously. But the concussion recognition tool is for parents and players and officials and coaches to understand the red flags. If you see a red flag, that person goes to the emergency department. If you don't see one, you remove them from play. And then there's some very simple questions that have to do with orientation, symptoms, memory, that anybody can actually look at. And lastly, again, is this King-Divic test. If you have a baseline time it takes to read these numbers, anybody can administer it in less than 2 minutes. If the player takes longer to read it after a suspected concussion, they're out and they're referred to their healthcare provider. So I'd strongly recommend that you look at the concussion recognition tool, because we simply don't have healthcare providers at every sporting event throughout the United States.
They could just search for that and get that over the internet,
Yep.
right, Mike?
Yeah.
So we've got, I think, just time for closing thoughts, and I leave it to you to offer us what you think. And I'd also encourage you to offer us resources, including your own Trio May or others, just to go online and learn about our resources that are available. Do you want to?
Go ahead, start.
Just other. I mean, we also too, we have some like sideline cards and handouts that we provide for our coaches and other youth associations. So it's very similar to that concussion sideline tool to give them resources to be able to recognize, but really understanding those signs and symptoms. And again, I think somebody said this already, but when in doubt, sit them out. It's better to be safe than sorry, always. But yeah, our website, even some of the heads up information too is really great. They've got great sideline tools and things that you can have with you.
And heads up, CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which is mentioned in the statute as well. So, great.
I think certainly if you're looking here locally within the Twin Cities, TRIA would be happy to be a resource for you. We have a multidisciplinary sport concussion program with physicians, Dr. Custer as our neuropsychologist, physical therapist specialty trained in vestibular and exertional rehab, and then athletic trainers as a part of our program as well. and then other multi-specialties across our system when those are needed. And then with regard to athletic trainers or education for your association, education for your coaches and parents, we do a lot of that in the community, and we'd be happy to work with you or help you out in that area as well.
Yeah, and we as well at Mayo Clinic, we're in Rochester, but again, some of you may not know, we're actually downtown Minneapolis, right across from Target Center. It's called Mayo Clinic Square. So we just opened up another 15,000 square feet. So you know, the shields of Mayo there's 3 shields in Mayo Clinic in the insignia. They're research, practice, and education. So we try and validate all these things. So does it really work? You know, is this really valid? So we do the research that drives how we practice, and then we try and teach that best practice to others. So both at Rochester and Minneapolis, that's what we try and do with our athletes. For injury protection, foundational elements are so key. Just how, you know, getting them that good foundation, because a lot of sports is neuromotor patterning, and when you learn bad habits, it's really hard to get those out. You have to have that good pattern in over and over and over written. So it's better to kind of get that good pattern initially. So the good foundational elements are key. We talked about the movement patterns. We also have a saying, pain-free doesn't mean normal. I do a lot of research on ankles and ankle sprains. So we found that after an ankle sprain, even though you may feel better, you know, you see a lot of people with recurrent sprains, still persistent pain. Most common injury in sports is an ankle sprain. And we actually found that the muscles contract differently after a sprain, and you have to train them to contract together again. So you may be okay for life, but you step off the curb, oh man, it gave way again. Or you're playing a game, oh man, it gave way again. So taking that next step, and really it's not just pain-free being normal, it's restoring all those components of stability and strength.
I guess my closing remarks get back to the culture of sport, and I think that we all have to work together to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that it should be fun, and we should try to work against professionalism and specialization for our young athletes. Parents are sometimes the worst offenders, so that comes through education. But I truly believe in the value of sport, and I used to ask my kids on the way to hockey tryouts every year, you sure you want to play hockey this year? Because I wanted them to know that it didn't matter to me. They were doing this because they chose to do it. And I could have been driving them to tuba lessons, and I would have been just as happy. But I think we have to make sure that we accentuate the positive, try to get rid of the negative, change the culture, and preserve these wonderful activities for our children.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to a number of other partners in the room. Minnesota has a real wealth of expertise in this area, more so than a lot of other states. And each of your institutions, as well as Project BrainSafe in St. Cloud, Hennepin County Medical Center, Institute of Athletic Medicine, University of Minnesota, Sanford Health, a lot of us are trying to get together and think about these things collectively and get that out into the community. And so I hope that this summit will lead to more partnerships, and I look forward to talking with you afterwards. Thanks, Tyree, and with that, I think we're done. Say thank you to our panel.
Hey everyone, how you guys doing? So we're about to start getting in here for our last panel. So this is our risk management panel. Really excited about this. Our moderator is Tim McNiff. Jamie Campbell, she's the player safety and concussion representative for USA Hockey Pacific District. She's also a 7-year director for the California Amateur Hockey Association. Steve Lang is the national director for USA Hockey's Pacific District. Neil Mitchell is the property and casualty insurance professional who has recently joined the Players Health Team, but he was formerly a managing director and member of Marsh Canada's National Leadership Executive Committee. Kevin Margarucci is the manager of player safety for USA Hockey, and Josh Opiola is the director of risk management of one of our partners, Sport Engine.
Thank you, Tyree. Yeah. Mic check, am I on? Okay, perfect. Thank you for coming back in and hanging around. This is one of those panels that this has taken me into deep water, but as I was doing the research on this and we were exchanging some emails back and forth, it's so timely, and this is something we're talking about, risk management. This panel is going to try to share best practices in risk management and the implementation of a successful risk management program. Now, most sports organizations know that they want to have a formal risk management program, but they don't know where to start and they need guidance. Most risk management programs can be complicated, and then there's implementation. So where do we begin in this discussion of trying to have this happen, Jamie? How do we start out with an organization? If you were to start one tomorrow or today, what's step one?
Well, I think you need to identify what your biggest risk is and start there. And then, try to determine how many of your members it affects, what's the impact of it, what's the volume, what's the urgency. So to give you an example, what we did in California 7 years ago was we determined, and Steve, you can speak to some of this, but Steve was the California affiliate president.
This is USA Hockey.
USA Hockey. And we had some bad concussions that were really impacting our athletes. And so Steve put together a panel of people that I was on to develop a concussion protocol. It was the first statewide affiliate protocol within USA Hockey. And since that time, it's grown to the Pacific District, which is 6 states. But to develop that, first we had to really understand how many of our athletes were affected by concussions, who was reporting, who wasn't, how often were they reporting, why weren't they reporting, what was the fear? What was the underlying fear as to why athletes didn't report? And then what kind of education was needed? At the time that we developed the protocol, there was no state legislation. All of the states now that have state legislation for concussions came after we started this. So we truly were.
Did they use your process, you think, as a?
No, I don't
okay.
think so, not at the legislative level, but they
Okay.
have within our sport, which is exciting. So, you have to figure out how to reach your membership, which a lot of the panels have talked about before. So we have a really multifaceted approach to that. We have print media, we have social media, we have forms and documents and protocol and videos and all the different ways that we can provide outreach to our membership. But it takes a real commitment. But I would say that when you're starting a risk management program, you need to identify the risk, the urgency, the volume, the impact, the membership, and then develop your communication around that.
Did you want to add something, Steve?
Sure. When we started it a while back, like she said, we had seen several of our players sustain concussions, some of them minor in nature where they were able to recover quickly and get back to play. And then there was others that sustained numerous concussions that ultimately affected their life as they grow and can no longer play contact sports. So putting together this concussion committee, the whole idea was about education and training. And that's exactly what they did. And it's a little difficult to push risk management, concussion training to coaches and players and parents that they just want to go play the sport. And now you're adding something to the play to try to help educate them to keep their players safe. So as we moved forward, we created protocols. We did training. We trained, recently over 3,000 people. But we do everything hands-on. And we go to the states, we go in front of the coaches and players and managers, and we talk about concussion protocols, training, awareness, things of that nature. Now, like you said, it's a district-wide, and we have to acknowledge that in every sport, there's some type of danger to it. In the sport of hockey, we have to admit that it's a dangerous sport. But at the same time, we do things to prevent it from being dangerous. And those are called rules or penalties that we put in place. We've talked about it, from the checking from behind and the tripping and the charging and the boarding, things of that nature. And then we recently put something together that was just to be for our district, that it was an acknowledgement form to all of our members that recognize that the sport is dangerous and you could be injured and you could sustain a concussion. And they were going to initial it, and it was going to be part of our membership registration. And USA Hockey ultimately took that product and made it a nationwide product. It's not a whole lot, but it just says that you recognize that the dangers of the sport, and you recognize that this could happen by initialing it, and you do that as part of your registration.
what we were talking about earlier in the sports administrators panel, the role of insurance. And that's where you come in, Neil. I mean, and you could have an administration or a youth organization that says, well, this would be a good idea to have, and we should get on this maybe tomorrow. You can walk in there and say, no, you'll do it last week. I mean, so how big a role does insurance play in this whole thing? We're coming from the insurer's perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I think the conversation around insurance is almost a byproduct of really the reality of day-to-day living, day-to-day sports, or playing in the field, the gym, or on the ice. And insurance shouldn't be the boogeyman, but I think in the conversation around a solution, as the other panels talked about their focus of expertise and experience and knowledge, I think the insurance piece is more of a partner on that, as opposed to thou shalt not do this, or I don't want to insure this or that. I kind of approach risk maybe a little bit in an unorthodox style, but someone taught me a long time ago that it's not about insurance, it's about risk. And in order to manage risk, you need data, and you need that data not only to make the appropriate decisions as opposed to anecdotal, non-empirical things, you also need it to transfer and price the transfer appropriately, because you don't want to price something too much and not give enough coverage when in fact it should be cheaper and broader in coverage, because the data is educating us. It's not this fiction, it's this reality. So I kind of look at the old triangle and call it a wisdom triangle, and you've got data on the bottom. Data drives information, and it's from that information we develop knowledge about risk and appropriate retentions and or transfer insurance and the pricing of that. And ultimately at the top of it is wisdom. And all that comes in. And I think the sport of hockey, I grew up in Canada, so when Sidney Crosby got hit, we thought the world had ended, right? And so...
Unless you're in Philadelphia.
True, true. Yes. Yes, that's...
Sorry.
Why did I bring up that analogy? Thank God I'm in Minneapolis.
I couldn't resist.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't like it.
There's a few Canadians here. We keep it quiet, but we're here. So, yeah, and I think that's it. Like, it's a triangle, and you got to start with data. And I think more than ever, technology can play a vital role in dealing with what Steve's talked about in terms of, let's not make this get in the way of having fun and coaching. If we can use technology to enable the collection of data, so we can start building some pretty good information from which we can make some really sound knowledge decisions. And insurers love data. I'm not an insurer, I'm an advisor practitioner. So I'm the guy in the middle. They love data. And if you can bring data that is rich and real and current, then you solve a lot of problems. We got people on the moon. We got this place open today because it's insurable. So as uninsurable as some people may think certain events are, like concussion, abuse, etc., those things can be insured. And they can be insured at a competitive price, at broad cover, but you can't get there unless you got the data. And so I think what I hear people talking about today is the relevance of information and data to start getting at the tough issues and solving the tough risk issues. And it's not always all about insurance.
Right.
If you can mitigate the risk, that means you're containing more risk, and you're still transferring severity, and that's what people are concerned about. They're concerned about what you read in the paper, the abuse allegations, the terrible concussion events, as Steve said, or the doctor before with U.S. Hockey. Some of these guys and girls, this is the way they're going to live their life. But we should have a vehicle to help them live that life that they're left with to live. And that comes through insurance.
So let's talk about, and Kevin, I don't mean to paint you in a corner. If this can be a toss-up, if you want to go with this, please. But remember data. insurance asking for data, doctors are asking for data. I mean, okay, but at your level, how do you go about collecting the data, and who are you depending on for that collection, and is it reliable?
Well, that's kind of the million-dollar question. And like Doc Stewart mentioned in the previous panel, we don't have a national injury registry database for youth sports. And I think that's a huge, huge thing and it's a big mountain to climb to get to it. But again, the million-dollar question again at the end of that is who's putting that data in? Is the data, you can build a great injury reporting system, but at the end of the day, in our world, and I know a lot of other youth sports are in this, it's parent volunteers, it's coaches or team managers, and how much knowledge do they, all right, they may know someone got injured, and Johnny went down on the ice and hurt his shoulder. Okay, so now if that got reported, all we know is there was a shoulder injury in Pee Wee hockey. What was that injury? How much time did they miss? And all that kind of stuff. And unless there's a physician diagnosis, and then that has to go back to those people to input that in order to get the actual injuries that are going on. And so is some data better than none? Maybe. But if it's bad data, is it any good at all? And that's the question that we have to, try to answer.
Josh, did you want to add to this?
No, I'm just acknowledging. That's
Okay.
That's exactly right.
So we're talking about injury reporting. What about transparency and accountability? And is somebody, if I say this person may be held out, or if I report this may cost us in this way. How do you, and this is a toss-up for anybody, you've been there, how do you tackle that? How do you address that issue? Steve?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Were you somewhere else? Okay. No, sorry. We're talking about the whole thing of transparency and accountability, and whoever's, and the fear, I guess, maybe. Fear might play an issue in the reporting of injuries.
And it does. And one, the player, if he sustains an injury, doesn't want to say anything because why? He doesn't want to be taken out of the game. He wants to continue to play. Another player probably won't recognize another player having an injury and probably doesn't feel it's his job to say something to anybody. The coach, if he knows you well enough, he could recognize if something were to have happened or you sustained some type of severe injury and do something about it. But at the same time, the coach wants you to, if you can stand, you can walk, you can talk, you can play. The parent also, they want you to play. They want you to be on that first line. They want you to be the starter, and they want you to get all the ice time you possibly can and score the goals. And sometimes they turn an eye to a possible injury, or they'll ask later on about it and say, you're okay, you feel okay, then you're back to being on the line again, and you're continuing to play. So the education and training of our coaches to recognize concussions, quick, simple symptoms, teaching the player that it's okay to say something if you're not feeling right, and your teammates to recognize a fellow teammate if there's a possible injury, to report that.
Jamie, can you talk about culture of risk versus culture of safety?
Yes, I can.
Would you please?
I've been dealing with this for about 7 years now, and in full disclosure, I'm a volunteer for USA Hockey and have been for, this is my 11th season, so my day job is hospital administration. So developing risk management programs is something that I see a lot of on a daily basis, but it's a culture shift. And I know we talked a lot about that, and we have in previous panels, but the culture of risk can feel very limiting and prohibitive. And a culture of safety can feel very inclusive and collaborative. So what we have tried to do with all of our player safety-focused Pacific District programs that we're currently working on, concussion included, is develop the culture that goes along with it. So your previous question to Steve was about accountability. And no one wants to take responsibility or accountability for reporting injuries. I mean, no one wants the responsibility. Who should? The player should, the parent should, the coach should, we all should.
Everybody's got a hand in it.
Right, but who wants to? Nobody.
So you have to change the culture. You have to make that shift to where everyone involved, where the coach says, no, absolutely, there's nothing more important right now than these people. These people are more important than the game. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we implemented a program, a little pilot, of elevator speeches. For those of you that are familiar with elevator speeches, trained all of the coaches in Northern California to give a 1-minute elevator speech before the start of the season to their teams, every age, mite all the way up, every level of play. And they were supposed to take 1 minute and just simply say, I need you to understand what a concussion is. These are some of the symptoms. I want you to tell me if you think you've had a concussion, because nothing is more important than you, your safety, and your brain. I want you to tell me. I had so many coaches, even those who had played a really high level of hockey in their careers, say to me, I have never had a coach tell me that they want me to tell them if I'm injured. And we saw such a shift just in Northern California with the way coaches started interacting with their athletes and their players. They were thanking us by the end of this little exercise. They were cussing at us before we started it. But by the time we were done, they actually all reported, when I followed up, they all reported that just telling them that they need to say it. You need to say this. Your players don't know. Oh, my players know. We're huggers. You know, we're good. We're all good. We have a great relationship. No, you need to say it. Just say it and watch what happens. And it was amazing. So I think that's just one of the little steps that we take to try to make that culture shift.
And Neil, again, insurance comes in a conversation. You can also help enforce that culture shift or help it happen.
Yeah. I mean, I really like the way you differentiated risk and safety. And I think the insurance industry falls into this trap of insurance and risk. And really, it's about safety. And if you have a safety culture, you're likely going to have, you're going to have incidences, you know, kids are going to get cut and scraped and banged up. But it's a different tone, it's a different context. And I think you get more and more people to embrace the delivery of information, which is what you're asking your coaches to provide, and that becomes part of your data set, right? And insurers, and some are very strange in their view on, actually insurers are the most risk averse. You think that they're assuming risk, but they're very uncomfortable with assuming risk, right? So I think no one has to be concerned that the insurer is the boogeyman, because they read the paper, they probably have kids too. So, but what I think brings insurance more into a social good is in the context of safety. Because insurance all started about, I mean, they were peers. They were like like-kinded risks. So envision a bunch of hockey players insuring themselves, right? So it is about safety, and I think that's a very interesting comment from Jamie, and it's a good takeaway for those of us in the insurance space is we need to be embracing, and let's use words that promote inclusion as opposed to, oh my gosh, it's our insurance renewal.
I think it's a good takeaway for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay, if you're worried that I didn't know that Josh was sitting down there, I do. I've been saving this because as we were having this discussion and we were looking at these issues, there are things that you know are out there. Concussions have been in the news and you know you're going to have to deal with these things. And then there are issues that come up and you don't see them coming, but maybe you should. And we had a story here locally within the past month about a skating coach in Eden Prairie who had an inappropriate relationship with one of his students. And then, of course, what has taken the national headlines in the last couple of weeks is what's happened with USA Gymnastics and Larry Nasser. And Josh Appiola is the director of risk management for Sports Engine. And you have a background in abuse. And so this whole thing coming up with Dr. Nasser. And you, from an outsider's perspective, you watch this, or from a news person's perspective, I watch this and I'm like, how could this happen? At so many levels, there were so many failures. From an organizational standpoint, how couldn't they see this coming? Or did they see it and did they just ignore it or shove it under the covers because of a different vision? So from your perspective, you see something like this and your thought is?
Oh my God, how do we continue to do the same thing over and over again? is we see this, and by the way, this is the most awesome Minnesota panel ever because this is all hockey people. I mean, seriously. We even have a Canuck here, so he's not on the board, but I'm a board president as well here in Minnesota, so this is the greatest hockey panel ever. This is pure representative of Minnesota, plain and simple. But back to it is that the same things continue to happen over and over again. And it amazes me because in this day and age where nothing is private, and anyone who thinks anything is private, it's not, by the way. Nothing is private. Snapchat's not private. Nothing is private. That organizations at the size of USA Gymnastics, Penn State, USA Swimming have continued to have these problems that they think they can hide and continue to hide year after year after year. And the attitude of continued failure and lack of responsibility at anyone's level, it is perplexing to me that we can continue to have this. And what I have seen is, it goes back to the very first panel that we had with, the parents and having everyone go into, sports specific. Everyone is doing just, my daughter's guilty of it. She's 13 years old, she only plays hockey. I've tried and she's like, I only want to play hockey. I'm not going to tell her she can't play hockey. But I have told her if she ever tells me she doesn't want to go, she doesn't have to go. But we have to continue to push these kids, and there's this social aspect of it that comes with mom and dad. One of the things that I try to teach my organizations that I work closely with is we are doing a tremendous job educating our coaches. We are. USA Hockey has been the leader for years on educating coaches on safe sport and all these different things. But we need to start turning the tide here and educating mom and dad. We need to educate mom and dad when you're signing your son or daughter up for these individualized trainings and classes, you need to take a training to understand what some of these warning signs are. And the warning signs are ridiculously obvious. Once you know what they are, they're blatant. And I walk around, unfortunately, noticing these signs. And they're not from the stranger danger that we were always brought up with. It is the close acquaintances. Tim, you and I were talking about it's like you'd have your nephew watch your daughters when they were younger, but he would be more concerned about.
No, I never.
Never.
No males were allowed to watch my daughters unsupervised ever. Never. Just my thing. That's what we did.
And pardon me, my point back was you're better off. Your odds are better having somebody that you got off of a website or referral to have somebody watch your kids than a family member, because the cases of abuse are not stranger abuses. They are friends, family, and acquaintances. That means hockey coaches, football coaches, all of this. Those are the people who have direct access to your kids and basically unlimited access to your kids. So educating the mom and dad about what the particulars are and laying ground rules specifically for the coaches, that's where the success is going to come. And this ability for the boys and the girls to come out and say that something's wrong we need to encourage that wholeheartedly, and don't let this stop. If there's anything you guys can walk away with from my portion of this panel, is don't let this stop where it's a bad thing to say anything. It's always okay to say something is wrong or something has happened. At no point is it not okay to push somebody away that it's not all right to talk about. It's okay to talk about. We just need more men to come out and say it's happened to them. Thank you, Theo Fleury, for helping with that.
Yeah. And Steve, you come at this you have your experience in hockey, but you also have 40 years in law enforcement and dealing with the same sort of thing. Is there anything you wanted to add to this?
Well, when it comes to the gymnastics, that's the newest one, but you keep in mind that we had a major one back in 2010 with the U.S. Swimming. And the whole incident boiled down to the way complaints were handled, and they weren't. So major lawsuits came out of that, and a lot of allegations of sexual abuse, and they were all sustained for the most part. So then the USOC, created a blueprint for player safety and policies to protect our athletes. And at the time, the USOC announced to all of their national governing bodies that you will create a policy, a safe sport type of policy, to protect all our athletes and everybody in our membership from any type of abuse, sexual assaults, or whatever. And the nice thing about it is that accountability really starts at the top. And so as administrators, you have to recognize that you are accountable for it, and you need to protect your athletes at all costs and protect your board of directors. And how you do that? By educating them and training them and making sure that they're going out there and preaching that word also, that it's okay to say something, and to make sure that everybody is aware of that. You know, there was over 300 complaints of sexual abuse in gymnastics and over a 20-year period, and 80 gymnasts came forward with similar allegations against one person. And it's like, allude to you, how can that possibly be happening today? And that's a fear for administrators too, as a parent, to have that happen to your child or somebody that you know. And unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I refer to all of our players as my kids or my players. And that's the way I look at it. And so the education and training, not only with its concussions, but it's the abuse and the safe sport, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and that administrators are and will be held accountable for all of that, and hence, you know, safe sport for all national governing bodies.
And Tim, really quick, along with that is the federal government, and now everyone hold on to your seats here. They passed legislation on Tuesday, actually, unanimously from both houses. It's never happens. It's 2018, and this country's in a weird place. But they just passed this legislation unanimously, and it's on Trump's desk now, and it's the Safe Sport Act of 2017. This is going to require every organization, whether you are a single Little League with no affiliation to a national governing body, all the way up to national governing bodies affiliated with the USOC or an AAU type organization. Every organization under there is going to be required to do abuse awareness training for everyone. This is remarkably life-changing for organizations, and it's going to be, it's a positive thing, but getting there is going to be a little bit of an implementation problem. But also, it's a shot to the states that really, you know, the states had an opportunity to solve this problem years ago, and having the federal government come in and manage this process, whatever side of the fence you're on this one, it might be, it's going to be a little bit difficult initially, just like everything else with Safe Sport. Like we were saying before, is all of our coaches yell and scream about initially having to do something, but then once they actually do it, they realize that this is a tremendous thing that's being done. So once we get there, but the Safe Sport Act of 2017 is going to be, it's going to change the landscape of youth sports across this country.
And there's other legislative proposals that are on the table today that senators are going after in regards to abuse. And so far as they want to make mandated reporters, going down as far as a player. Now, whether that will ever happen, I don't know. But one of the other topics is that mandate every NGB to notify their entire membership of any sexual abuse case or case of abuse, that they need to be aware of it, what happened, how it happened, and what was done about it. And that's pretty difficult for USA Hockey to send out to our players, 350,000 kids, you know, about sexual abuse or abuse that has happened. So we're working with the legislative components to try to curtail that to a point where we're willing to notify people, but maybe in a declaration form as to a synopsis as to what has occurred, instead of giving the whole dialogue as to the incident. So those are active legislative proposals that are on the table today.
Neil, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I mean, it's been an interesting discussion. Something that strikes me about, thanks Josh for taking us out of the closet here as hockey people, but what's interesting about the sport of hockey, and this isn't about not any other sport either, because this I think applies to every sport, but we've got a bit of a microcosm here to make an observation, And what's interesting about hockey is over the years and over the seasons, the game changes. And the changes brought to the game trying to kind of catches up to the social realities. And, you know, I didn't learn how to fight in the playground. I learned how to fight on a skinny little blade of steel on ice. But you don't fight anymore on ice. And you don't have no touch. You have touch icing is gone. Now it's no touch icing. And hitting is, my 5-year-old played rep hockey. He hit at 5. My son, 6 years younger, he didn't learn to hit until 12 years of age. So in 6 years, that game changed dramatically, and continues to change. And I think, you know, there's hope there, not only for the game of hockey, but also for other sports, particularly contact sports, and like football. And I'm not telling, a Canadian isn't going to tell an American that the game of football's got to change, but I'll let people in this country figure that one out. But it'll change. It's going to have to change. And so when it comes to the social issues around abuse, I mean, this is a societal issue. It's not just locked up in hockey or football. It's in the places that we go to make a living. And I think the world is changing, and therefore the sport, and it's going to come down to volunteers, are going to have to figure out a way how to change, not how the game's played, but how the game is observed. And I think things like Josh said and the learning, Josh knows what to look for. 3 years from now, the way things go, I'll know what to look for, and people out there will know. Look, so I think it's concerning that we have these issues, but there's a lot of hope, because I can just look at the game of hockey and say, it's changed. As a parent, it's changed. I used to play it. It's changed. I love it. It's changed. And I think football and other heavy contact sports are going to go through the same thing, and they, you know, they can be disruptive and transformed. You can Uberize football. You can Uberize hockey. I think it'll be up to the people in the game that love the game that change the game.
Make it happen. I like the direction you're taking this. We're in the last couple minutes of this, and most everyone's been here throughout the course of the day. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to give everybody in the panel an opportunity for like a final thought as we're about to wrap this whole thing. Can pertain to what we're talking about now, or if you want to speak on something you saw later. What I don't want you to do is get in the car and say, I was up there, had this opportunity to say something, and I didn't get a chance to say it. So Josh, if you would.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. And thanks, Tyree and Players Health, for having me here. This has been a tremendous opportunity, but the one thing that you can take back on my side is talk to your moms and dads. Educate your moms and dads about what their kids are doing. Don't just hand I use the word hand your keys off as your children being the keys. Don't just hand them off to a stranger because they tell you that, as Corey was mentioning, that they might be the best baseball player of all time. Don't just trust them blindly. Do a little research, ask the questions, ask if they're doing it's one-on-one training, if there's going to be others there. Ask those questions as a parent. Don't just be blinded by the promise of scholarship, the promise of major league aspirations, whether it's NFL, NHL, Major League Baseball. Don't be blinded by those as a parent. As a president of a hockey association, I see this. I tell every one of my first-year squirts, first-year mites, that no one's going to get drafted this year, and the parents are still awestruck that their kids are not going to get drafted when they're 10 years old. And I promise you, if that day comes, is that I'll paint my entire body blue. So with that, thanks. I appreciate it.
You know, I have a few thoughts on everything that happened today, sitting around all day. And I come from a sports medicine, athletic training background, and now have kind of an administrative role with player safety with USA Hockey. And so I think on the previous sports medicine panel, Amy was really pushing for athletic training and advocating, and I could sit up here and preach about athletic trainers and being available at sidelines all day long. But I think earlier in the day, someone said youth sports in this country is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And my big question, I wonder, is why is none of that money put towards some of this stuff we were talking about today? We could buy new uniforms every year. We can travel in charter buses. We can pay coaches 6 figures to coach a youth sport out of the money they're paying, but we don't put money into medical coverage or injury data collection or anything like that. And if there is money put towards that, I think it's a very small percentage. So I think, again, it's a culture shift. And I know in hockey, everyone wants those 3 A's after I'm playing for such and such hockey club, AAA. I mean, is it so bad if they have 1 A? Because the second A costs a little bit more, and the third A costs even a little bit more than that. And so I think our priorities are a little messed up. And I think some of that money that's going into youth sports should be put towards some of these initiatives towards safety, whether it's concussion education or injury data collection.
Or all of it.
Yeah, all of it that we've talked about today.
Yeah. Thank you. Neil?
That's great. I mean, in a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I didn't think I'd come down here and learn that an American could speak Canadian. A, and A.
I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so we were real close.
Good A. For me, I think a takeaway for me is the word safety and inclusion and partnering in community. And there's a lot of issues, like the abuse issue, the concussion issue, insurabilities issues, but I think that that mindset and that culture around safety is what's going to drive change and actually get at the data and actually get the parent to speak up or the child to speak up, whether they've got a concussion or they felt that something was done untoward to them or to their friend in the change room. So thank you. I think, Tim, I really appreciate your questions. Yeah.
Steve?
Well, first of all, thanks for moderating this and for Players Health for putting this on. It's great. As administrators, and I know there's a lot of administrators out there for whatever sport you have, our sole responsibility is to develop our players and to protect our athletes at all costs. And under the USOC, there's 47 national governing bodies, and we all have a responsibility to create policy for safe sport and concussion awareness and training for all of our athletes, coaches, players, parents, and volunteers. As a district director for USA Hockey, I was able to take a product from one state and take it to several states, including Alaska, Washington, Nevada, Oregon, California. And with me, we brought Jamie on board as the first player safety coordinator, concussion training person. And she's a volunteer just like we are. And she travels quite extensively and provides training to protect our players and to create concussion awareness to a great deal of our coaches and our parents and our kids and stuff like that. And we've created policies and paperwork that recognizes how to return back to our sport. And after 2 years, all of these states are now 100% compliant in concussion awareness. So thank you to Jamie for what she's done for our sport and sports in general.
So I wanted to tack on to something Sally said earlier in the panel about the shift in, there was a discussion that the shift in youth sports, maybe that the numbers are declining, not increasing, but then you brought up that other sports are increasing in numbers that we don't maybe always think about as sports. So I would just like to say that regardless of the sport, even if it's Frisbee golf, whatever it may be that you used as an example, and you asked about who's responsible and who's accountable. The administrators of those programs are. And so for me, my focus is making that culture shift. What is your culture? So I challenge you to look within your organizations and just ask yourself if you're doing it right. If you can identify your biggest risk in your organization or in your sport, ask yourself if you are doing the top 1, 2, or 3 things to try to mitigate that risk or address it head on. You know, are you putting programs in place that allow you to create open dialogue with your membership about that risk? You know, are you doing it right? I guess that's probably my parting thoughts would be, you know, just to challenge you to really look inward and make sure that you're creating a culture that allows your membership and your sport to thrive.
And I just want to point out, too, that this was described as the most Minnesota panel ever with a definite West Coast flavor.
Yeah.
Because I was walking in behind Jamie and Steve today, and I was cussing how cold it was. They weren't wearing overcoats, and they're from California, and Jamie was saying how great this was. So that's an optimist right there. I want to thank everybody for coming and attending today, and you for giving up your time and dispensing your information, and for Tyree for allowing me to be a part of this, this opportunity today. When he talked about this about 9 months ago, when we first talked about this, he just had a vision. And to see this come forward and to see people give up their time and their day and to take something away from this and go make this whole culture of sport better, especially for children, is a wonderful thing, and I thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to have quick parting thoughts here. You know, I'm kind of speechless at this point, honestly. I think when I had a passion to really create this summit, to really start a dialogue. We sat down and we launched Players Health, and as you guys see, we haven't talked about our product. That's not what this is really about. I really want to share people around what Players Health is. I'm not going to be on this earth for forever. We all have a finite amount of time in which we're going to live. And I want to make sure that before I die, I leave an impact in sports. That's really kind of what I feel like God has called me to do. And that's really why I decided to create this company. So I want you to know the foundation of what we're about. And we're here to really start a dialogue around how we can really get things together. Before an organization can implement our technology, there has to be the foundation of risk management, health and safety, positive coaching. Like, all of this has to happen before technology can even come. And I think what we've learned is that organizations aren't ready to implement, say, a technology until we have this. So we want to come and help bring all these resources together so that we can all help bring the technology and the data so that we can start solving some of these big problems. This was just the beginning. I want you guys to know that. And I really want us to really spread the word, talk about what we learned here today, the possible outcomes and partnerships that we can have here. I just want you guys to know I really appreciate you guys coming. Our sponsors, I really appreciate all of our sponsors for supporting us. This is yet just the beginning. We're going to have another Players Health Summit every year, but we want to continue to build on this. Really appreciate you guys' time, and thanks a lot for coming. I do want to have a huge thank you to Carrie and Caroline. These two helped make this process. And then I also want to give a quick introduction to our team. I'm not sure if you guys know the whole Players Health team. We're kind of all over the place, but we'll have everyone come up really quick so you can get kind of a face to all the emails and phone calls that you have. So Dylan Wong, he's our Director of Customer Acquisition. You can stand up, Dylan, it's okay. Chris Pasegan is our COO. And then we have Carrie Moxness here. She's our Director of Customer Engagement and Implementation. Neil Mitchell is one of our newest members of Players Health, really looking at the insurance side of what we're doing, how we help organizations with that. And then Otis Grigsby, our General Counsel here. I didn't miss anyone. So yeah, really appreciate you guys. Please take some food here. Tons of dialogue. I would love to connect with everyone. Love to get your feedback. How can we make this better? What can we do differently? What can our company do differently to help your organization? Thank you guys.